Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Lee County Board of County Commissioners. Today is September 5th, 2023. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone to please rise, and I'd like to call Pastor Benjamin Fletcher from Step of Faith Ministries up for the invocation. And after that, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good morning, Pastor.
Let us pray. Father, we come before your presence. First of all, thank you for just such a beautiful morning. Thank you, Father, for giving us a day of rest yesterday. Thank you, Father God, for being here this morning. Your word says that where there are two or three gathered in your name, you dwell in the midst. So we thank you for being part of this meeting. Thank you, Father God, this morning for your servants, our mayor, our city manager, our city staff, and our city council members. I give you thanks for the way of service that each commissioner has chosen to take upon on behalf of us. Give them the grace to bring truth this morning, justice and stability to our county. Give them the power to do what is right and to rule in fairness. May our community be known for its justice. We pray that you would be glorified today through the decisions of the city council. Heavenly Father, we pray that as today's agenda is discussed for our city, that the people's interests be above our own. Remind each commissioner that you have entrusted them this position, not to be served, but to serve the public, as Christ, who is King, came not to be served, but to serve. We pray for the hundreds of families that are moving on a daily basis to Lee County and calling this home. May they feel welcomed, accepted, loved, and safe. We also pray that you give each commissioner the grace to come up with the best possible and morally right solution that would best benefit the people of Lee County. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Consent number 5. Okay. Good deal. All right. Let's begin this morning with some ceremonial presentations. The first one is recognizing Hunger Action Month, and at this time I'd like to call Ryan Euler from Harry Chapin Food Bank up to the podium, and bring anybody else here with you who you would like to celebrate this. Is it just you today, Ryan? Excellent. Yeah, come on forward. If you'll stand at the podium, I'm going to read this resolution into the record, and then we'll take a picture together afterwards, and we'll have somebody say a few words. Ryan, maybe we'll even give you a chance to say a few words. Okay, the resolution reads as follows. Whereas September is Hunger Action Month, and whereas food is a basic and essential need of every living creature, and whereas Harry Chapin Food Bank is the largest hunger relief nonprofit and the only Feeding America member in Southwest Florida serving Lee County, and whereas 14.7 million pounds of food were distributed by Harry Chapin Food Bank in Lee County during 2022, and whereas this September we ask citizens to please join the fight to end hunger and to lend their power, voices, actions, and commitment to ensure nobody ever has to make an impossible choice between food and other necessities such as medicine, utilities, or childcare. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of County Commissioners of Lee County, Florida, proclaims the month of September as Hunger Action Month in Lee County and encourages all citizens to advocate, volunteer, and raise their awareness of this issue during Hunger Action Month to help fight to end hunger in Lee County. It's signed this 5th day of September 2023 by me, the chairman of the board. Congratulations. Happy Hunger Action Month.
Thank you, Brian.
Congratulations, Ryan. All right, so get the chair out of the way. Perfect. Ryan, would you say a few words for us?
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much. Harry Chapin Food Bank, as a lot of people know, has been in the community for 40 years now. And we serve 250,000 people each month, and that's since COVID started. We really, I mean, we're here in cloudy skies, we're here in clear skies. So the Hurricane Ian, even tropical storm that we had, the coastal flooding, we're not first responders, but as soon as we're able to, we go into those areas and help ensure people have food. I mean, our mission is to lead our community in the fight to end hunger. Our vision is that where we don't have hunger in our community. So we really want to institute that in Lee County. We want to make sure that our neighbors are fed. We feed children, seniors, families, veterans. So we just thank you very much and appreciate the proclamation.
Thank you for all you do, Ryan. Congratulations. At this time, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Pendergrass.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could have Tracy Thornton and Sydney from the Lee Health come up. Anybody else you have here? Any other staff you have here with you from Lee Health? Michael and Nick's here. All right, good. Thank you. If you all going to stay here at the podium, I have a resolution to read in the record, and thank you for all your work and all your awareness you do here in Lee County to help our patients and our community. The resolution reads as, whereas over 23% of Florida residents are 65 and over or older, not in this room though. Whereas falls are the leading cause of fatal and non-fatal injuries among Florida's senior population, resulting in physical, personal, social, economic burdens. Whereas estimated that annually there are more than 150,000 hospital-treated injuries from falls among 30 and 65 and older, with medical charges exceeding $2 billion. Whereas 40 and 65 and older falls account for more than 75% of all fractures treated in emergency room departments. Whereas falling and the fear of falling can lead to depression, loss of mobility, and loss of independence. And whereas injuries from falls are preventable community health problems. And whereas cost-effective home modifications, community strategies are available to improve safety and lessen the likelihood of falls and injuries that can result in. And whereas the state of Florida Department of Elderly Affairs Community for a Lifetime, the Florida Department of Health Office of Injury Prevention, Florida Statewide Falls Prevention Coalition, and the state area agencies on aging, in partnership with Florida communities and residents, are working to increase awareness of this issue and encourage Florida residents to take steps to protect those who are not at risk of falling. Now, therefore, be resolved, the Board of County Commissioners, Lee County, Florida, proclaims September 22nd, 2023 as Falls Prevention Awareness Day. Here in Lee County, I urge everyone to join us in observance of this. Duly executed and signed by our chairman. Thank you.
Very good. Congratulations, John.
Thank you again for being back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks for coming.
Love doing this. Every year. Yeah, good to see you guys again this year.
Like Michael's new haircut.
Michael, congratulations.
Yeah. Katie's here too.
Thanks for doing that.
Great.
One more for the record here.
Thank you. I'm not sure who's going to speak on behalf of the group. Was it Tracy, Sydney? Thank you. Sydney, I'm sure you're going to tell us all about how most of the falls account for like 64% of our trauma patients a lot of times in our
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So I want to thank the county commissioners as well as the community for your support in this. We also want to thank Lee County Emergency Medical Systems and our fire departments, because they do help us spread the injury prevention word for falls prevention throughout our community. We'll be doing several events, a couple with the fire departments this month, and a big one out at Shell Point on the 22nd. And the community is welcome to all of those. 1 in 4 over the age of 65 will fall.
Right.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for everything you're doing, because it affects all of us, even if you're not dealing with elderly parents, your neighbors, it could be a friend or somebody in the store. So again, thank you for everything you're doing, making awareness. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Pendergrass. All right, at this time, I'd like to recognize the chair of our Lee County Legislative Delegation, Jenna Persons-Mullica. She's joined us this morning and would like to make a special presentation. So welcome to the podium, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, staff. members of the public. It's a pleasure to be here as always, and it's my distinct pleasure to come before you as chair of the Lee County Legislative Delegation and announce our upcoming legislative delegation meeting. Our delegation was formed in 1886. And for those members of the public who might not be aware of the delegation, it's comprised of every House member and every Senate member whose district makes up a part of Lee County. So currently, we have 3 Senate districts and 5 House districts that represent a portion of Lee County. And those office holders will be at our delegation meeting, which will be Monday, October 30th at 9 a.m. at Florida Southwestern in the nursing building where we've been meeting for years past. Now at the delegation meeting, it's our pleasure. We hear from the commission, we hear from representatives of all the local jurisdictions and local entities. We hear from nonprofits and we hear from members of the public. And if you would like to make a public presentation, I'd ask that you reach out to my office by Monday, October 16th at 5 p.m. However, members of the public are welcome to just show up at the delegation meeting and we'll hear from them at the end of the meeting if they don't reach out beforehand. We'll have additional information on our website, which is leedelegation.com. And anybody can reach out to me at my email address, which is jenna.persons@myfloridahouse.gov. But as the chair of the delegation, I know I can make the statement on behalf of our entire delegation, but we look forward to hearing from the commission and we look forward to working with you during this next legislative session. We had an incredibly successful past session and we brought home millions of dollars that's yet to come down here, but will come down here to help in our relief efforts and help build a great Lee County for the future. And you all have been valuable partners with us. And we couldn't do anything unless we are working together as a team. And I'm truly appreciative of that. And I thank each and every one of you. And I want to thank your senior management and team as well. You know, when we go up and we fight for dollars, I know for each of the 5 of you, it's not about politics and it's not about how many dollars and cents you bring home, but it's about the people of Lee County. It's about helping and serving the folks of Lee County now and building a better Lee County for the future. And while we've had a strong recovery and we've made great progress since the storm that devastated all of us here, we have a long road ahead of us. And I look forward to continuing to work with you all in the coming years. So thank you. And again, everyone's welcome to our delegation meeting, October 30th at Florida Southwestern State College at 9 a.m. in the nursing building. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Smolika. Any questions, commissioners, or any comments at all? I just want to say on behalf of the entire board, we thank you very much and the members of the delegation as well for the teamwork in the wake of Hurricane Ian. You know, last year, obviously, our community was devastated and it was a monumental task to try and bring home the amount of money that was necessary to try and get our recovery started. But that was a good start. You know, we're going to have a lot to work on together this year as a team, and I'm looking forward to doing it as a team with you all and the entire delegation. So thank you.
Chair.
All right. All right, that concludes our presentations for this morning. We'll take up the recap. This is the part of the agenda where we discuss any additions, deletions, or revisions to the agenda. Our county administration has requested that we consider revisions to the draft CDBG-DR action plan based on public comment. So they proposed those. They were attached to the agenda item prior to the meeting. So at this time, we're just going to take up adding the revisions into the agenda item. And then later, when we get to the administrative agenda, we'll go ahead and vote on the item officially. So do I have a motion to add those revisions?
So moved.
Okay, motions from Commissioner Ruane and the seconds from Commissioner Sandelli. Do we have any discussion on that? Would anybody like to speak in public comment on just the revisions part, adding the comments into the agenda item? We'll talk again about the agenda item later. Okay, I see no public comment. Back to the board. Any further discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. And that's all we needed to deal with on the recap today. So we'll move into the consent agenda. Commissioner Greenwell, do you have any items to pull for discussion?
Chairman, I do not.
Okay, Commissioner Pendergrass?
None.
I have no items. Commissioner Sandeli, Commissioner Ruane?
Oh, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so no items to pull for discussion. At this time, I'd like to take public comment on the consent agenda items. I do have a card from William Joe Shopmiller. Yeah, please come forward then. And I believe Marcia Ellis as well. Did you have some items that you wanted to speak on the consent agenda? Okay, great. So Mr. Shopmiller, thank you. And when you come to the podium, you don't need to touch the microphone. Everything's all set. And can you tell us what number you're speaking on? I think it's 5.
Number 5, I've noticed that you're looking for people to build affordable housing, and I've been an advocate for a long time. That is needed, but also what is needed until that can be done is some kind of emergency housing that's affordable for people, like a youth hostel setting. I've noticed that the police station is moving, so there is a building by Rosa Parks that they're utilizing. I did talk to the chief about that, and he says come and see him, but I don't know what the value on this building is, or that. I know it needs a little roof work because of the hurricane. There's some shingle damage, but I think that would be a vehicle that would be making money. You know, people coming on Greyhound, needing a place to stay while they wait for a bus. And also people doing day labor and that, but to bring in revenue for the housing fund, like the Lois Healy's that build their efficiencies and other developers to utilize what we make, take in as a vehicle for like fundraising and business, not-for-profit and nonprofits. Okay, so that's my idea on that. But small businesses created to bring in revenue to aid with this urgent need. So anything that we've done, any grant money, even if we have to pay it back, I've said that. No, you know, we asked for seed money. We didn't ask for give us and we don't do anything. We need to work for that and do other kinds of fundraising and things like that. So anything that be done and to get people off the street and into affordable lodging, even temporary until that can be done, we're not going to see people on the street that way. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call Marcia Ellis, and I believe that's the last card for consent agenda items.
Good morning, Commissioners. Marcia Ellis for the record. I just want to say that I did go looking for the recap on the consent agenda, and I was unable to locate it because I did want to review those items, and I'm sure that someone in administration can assist me with that after the meeting. I'm commenting specifically on the implementation of the Live Local Act. We have seen a couple of examples come through in the past couple of years of legislation that's come through the state with good intentions to have positive impacts on local communities. But in the implementation, problems have arisen, such as what we experienced with the contractors and moving some of those things to the state level. There have also been some concerns raised about other legislation that, again, best intentions, but in implementing some problems arise, such as enforcing noticing, for instance. We're hearing with news reports, et cetera, of some problems that are coming to light with the Live Local Act, which in essence is taking away local control of housing and approvals for housing and moving it to more of a state level or consolidating power. And I have a great deal of concerns about that because we have a very different community. We have different geophysical properties here in South Florida, Southwest Florida. We have a different economies throughout the states. And I think that removing strong local input and control over community development and in this affordable housing is a huge mistake. We have a very different community, for instance, than Hendry County. And so we have to look at these things straight on and acknowledge both the positives and the negatives that come with our specific locations. To consolidate power at the state level and take away people's ability to engage with their government on these community development issues is going to continue the crisis that we're experiencing. When we talk about the developers, we're not really looking at their practices, for instance, when we are approving them, to see if these are developers that have gone into regions and exploited market rate rentals themselves to the peril of the people. What kinds of practices do these developers have whenever they go in and acquire properties and raise rents, hundreds of dollars, putting people in essence out on the street? I think that we need to retain local control of our community development and have strong community dialogue and discussion about the implications that are far reaching of the Live Local Act before we rush into it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. All right. Does anybody else wish to speak on any of the items on the consent agenda? This would be items 1 through 41. Okay, I see no further comments
The
then.
balance.
We have a motion to approve the balance from Commissioner Pendergrass and the seconds from Commissioner Ruane. Do we have any further discussion, commissioners? All right, I see no further discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. All right, so that concludes the consent agenda. We'll move to convene as the Board of Port Commissioners at this time. And we will take up an item related to the Board of Port Commissioners. Andrea Frazier from the County Attorney's Office, I'd like to ask you to introduce this item, please. Okay, very good. We'll come back to the board. Commissioners, do you have any questions on this item?
Move the item.
Motion for approval from Commissioner Ruane, second from Commissioner Greenwell. Do we have anybody who's come to speak in public comment on the Port Authority item? Okay, I see no public comment, so we'll close public comment. Back to the board. Any further discussion on this?
Chairman.
Yes,
I'd like
Commissioner
to
Pendergrass?
I believe Ben Siegel's here this morning, somewhere in the audience. Ben's back here. I just want to commend Ben and his staff and our county team for working with the local and bringing this contract before us. So thank you again, and thank you for all the men and women that serve the RSW, one of the best airports in the nation. So again, thank you for everything, providing great service at the RSW.
Amen. Keep winning those awards. All right. Any further discussion? All right. See no further discussion. Are there any objections to the motion? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. All right. We will now reconvene as the Board of County Commissioners. And I'd like to ask our county manager to introduce item number 2 on the administrative agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the award construction contract to expand the Lee County Emergency Operations Center, and I'd like to ask Mr. Ehab Gurgis to present the item.
Good morning.
Morning.
Ehab Gerges Construction Management. Item number 2 is to approve a contract with Manhattan Construction for the EOC expansion. The project will add 36,873 square foot to the existing 29 square foot. The first floor will add 2,455 square foot courtyard, 15 offices, and a training center that will be converted to a sleeping area during activation. The second floor will add 10 offices of 52 consoles. The expansion will serve the public safety emergency communications, Lee County Sheriff Office communication, and the TOC for the Department of Transportation. I would like also to share a 2-minute video with you to show the expansion, how it will be connected to the existing, and some overview for the whole project. I think we should have sound. with your approval today, we're gonna issue notice to proceed to Manhattan, end of November, so we can avoid the hurricane season, and construction should take about 18 months. Thank you.
Commissioners, what questions do you have for the team? Yeah,
Chairman,
Commissioner
I
Green?
have a question. Does this add any additional parking?
Correct. We're adding 67 parking spaces.
Very good. Any other questions, commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner Ruane?
Just if you could identify some of the increased cost. I remember when we initially were presented this, we went to the legislator and received 13.7 for a match. I was under the impression that was 50%. Obviously, this amount's greater than that.
So the funding for this job are three funding sources. We have $16 million from ARPA and 13.5 from state appropriation and about 6.5 million from CIP.
I guess the question I had is how much does it increase when we were initially told the project? It's gone.
So the job, when we got the first estimate, which was about 2 years ago, was about $19.5 million. And now it increased to $28,699,000.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that question? Was that mainly due to cost increase in the construction market, inflation, things like that, materials?
Yes, that was inflation in the coast, yes.
Very good. All right. Thank you. If there's no further questions, then I'll go ahead and call for public comment at this time. Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to speak in public comment on the Public Safety Center contract being awarded? Okay, I see nobody wishing to speak in public comment, so we'll come back to the board. Does somebody wish to make a motion? Motion for approval from Commissioner Sandelli. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Pendergrass. Do we have any discussion on this, commissioners? Commissioner Sandelli, go ahead.
All spent probably too much time there. It's a phenomenal facility. The need is certainly there. And obviously, weather conditions are not going to change in Florida probably in our lifetime. So I think it's well used.
Any further questions or comments? I just had one too, Mr. County Manager. Could you talk about, so the second floor, so obviously the first floor will continue to be the situation room, is that correct? And then the second floor is going to be used how?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Ms. Brady to, okay, never mind. I'm going to ask Ehab.
So the first floor will be offices, restrooms, showers, and the training room. That training room would be converted during activation to sleeping area. The second floor will be 52 consoles for the EMS and the sheriff and the TOC for DOT. And there will be also some offices for EMS.
So are we going to still continue to use the existing situation?
Correct.
We are, okay.
Correct.
That's what I was wondering.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. All right, thanks. If there's no further questions or discussion, then we'll go ahead and vote on the item here. Are there any objections? Okay, I see no objections. That motion carries unanimously. All right, Mr. Harner, please introduce item number 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to authorize the Chief Hearing Examiner's annual merit increase.
Okay, and this is an item for discussion for the board. I believe the contract calls for an increase between 4% and 6%. And so at this time, so that we know what we're talking about, would somebody like to make a motion?
I move the make a motion to bring it forward with the 6%. I believe that's what we did with the county manager, county attorney last time around to make it consistent.
Okay, very good. So we have a motion from Commissioner Pendergrass. Do we have a second? Do you have a second for that? Second from Commissioner Sandelli. Okay. At this time, we'll go ahead and take public comment on this item. Does anybody wish to speak in public comment on the Chief Hearing Examiner's merit increase? Okay, I see no public comment. Back to the board. Commissioner Pendergrass, I did receive a letter, and I think we all were copied on it, from the Chief Hearing Examiner as well. The letter says, Chairman Hammond, the Florida Legislature recently extended the duration of the drop from 5 to 8 years effective July 1st, 2023. Human Resources has confirmed that several county employees have elected to extend their participation in drop by the 3 additional years, and further, new drop applicants have been electing the 8-year option. The Chief Hearing Examiner employment contract was drafted to coincide with her original drop date, September 30th, 2024. In view of the favorable performance reviews, I respectfully request that the board consider renewing or extending her employment contract. The original contract term was 3 years. Renewing the contract for another 3-year term will coincide with the new drop date. So I offer that for consideration, Commissioner Ruane.
I thought the contract was to be renewed in July of '24. And my understanding is it automatically renews, and my understanding also is that we'll have a discussion. I'd rather deal with it in July or June or May as opposed to today. So I think she's doing a great job. It's reflective of this, but I just think it's a little premature. And I think we probably have a discussion, and we have, because there's going to be other people that are going to be affected by the change and drop and contracts associated with that. I know the county attorneys want as well. So I just would like to be consistent in the way we go about doing things, and I'd prefer, just my own opinion, that we deal with it in April and May of '24 as opposed to today.
And my motion was for based upon the current contract extended current to 24 and the merit rates for that. Since we didn't advertise that, I would just stick with the agenda item before us
Okay.
with the motion, the 6%.
All right. Thank you very much, commissioners. Good deal. I brought the item forward as I was asked to. There you go. All right. Seeing no further discussion. Is there any further discussion? All right. Seeing no further discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. All right. Mr. Hunter, please introduce item number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the Award Hurricane Housing Recovery Program grant agreements, and I'd like to ask Mrs. Rzdalski to present the item.
Morning.
Morning, Commissioners. Mickey Rzdalski with Lee County Department of Community Development. This item is to award $6.68 million in hurricane housing recovery grant agreements to 4 nonprofits. Approval of these agreements will allow rehab and new construction of rental property to the benefit of 173 low and very low income rental households affected by Hurricane Ian, with a priority given to households with special needs. This funding is in addition to the $8.2 million that was awarded by the board in June of earlier this year to assist 133 households affected by Hurricane Ian with home ownership strategies. I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions at this time for our staff? Okay, I see no further questions. At this time, then we'll go ahead and take public comment on the item. Has anyone come to speak on administrative agenda item 4, the Hurricane Housing Recovery Program grant agreements? Okay, I see no hands. So we'll come back to the board. Does somebody wish to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, move the item.
Motion for
Second.
approval from Commissioner Greenwell, seconds from Commissioner Ruane. Do we have any discussion on this item? Commissioner Sandeli, you're
I have a
recognized.
question. We use a lot of terms in the course of business. The term low income or very low income, is that defined somewhere, or is that changing based on needs within the market?
I'm going to ask Mark Moore to answer that question.
Great question, Commissioner. Typically, we consider low income or people who are eligible for these type of programs to be at 80% AMI or below. Just typical.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Very good. Any further questions or comments? All right, I see no further questions or comments. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. Mr. Hunter, please introduce item number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to approve direction from the August 15th board workshop on a long-term recovery task force. At that meeting, you asked us to ensure that we were covering unincorporated Lee County, but also to ensure that the municipalities had their own independence in this conversation. So currently, we've met with the chair of the task force. We've met with the task force itself and with Haggerty, our consultant. We're moving forward with the plan, hopefully to be delivered by December, no later than December 19th. In that plan, it will have a number of plans for each entity. Each stakeholder will be able to vote on their own plan, including the county, and then the board will just accept the entirety of the plan.
Very good. Commissioners, any questions on this item for our staff? Okay, I see no questions. At this time, I'd like to take public comment on administrative agenda item number 5. Would anybody like to speak on this item? Okay, I see no hands, so back to the board. Commissioners, anybody wish to make a motion on this?
Gladly will move the item.
Okay, Commissioner Ruane moves approval, second from Commissioner Greenwell. Do we have any discussion on the item? Commissioner Sandeli?
Just like to thank Commissioner Wayne for the work that he's done to date and will continue to do. He picked this up, at the very start, and I think you have to go back and we build on that. So again, Commissioner, thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. Any other comments? Or agree? Yeah, I agree too as well. Thank you, Commissioner Ruane, and really enjoyed the workshop as well, and looking forward to the teamwork as we move forward. So, all right, if there's no further discussion, are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. Mr. Hunter, please introduce item number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to approve resolution authorizing receipt of Florida Department of Commerce loan for Hurricane Ian recovery. And I'd like to ask Mr. Winton to present the item.
Commissioners, this is a $25 million bridge loan from the state of Florida to help pay for expenses as a result of hurricanes Ian and Nicole. It is a 2-year loan, 0% interest. And the town of Fort Myers Beach and the city of Sanibel have also received similar bridge loans from the state.
Very good. Commissioners, any questions for our team? Okay, I see no questions. At this time, has anyone come to speak in public comment on administrative agenda item 6? Okay, I see no comments. Then back to the board. Does somebody wish
Move
to?
the item.
Motion for approval from Commissioner Ruane. Do we have a second? Second from Commissioner Sandelli. Do we have any discussion on that? Okay, I see no discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. All right, Mr. Harner, please introduce item number 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to consider revisions to draft CDBGDR action plan based on public comment. And I'd like to ask Mr. Salyer to present this item.
Commissioners, we do want to thank our residents for participating in this process. It was very successful as these things go. We collected about 10 times as many comments as the entire state of North Carolina did in their most recent action planning effort. So very nice participation. We took, as part of that, we took comments at 10 public meetings, including 9 standalone meetings just for this purpose that were organized by our staff. And I really want to personally thank Jeannie Sutton for keeping us on track for all of those meetings. The proposed changes as a result of the comments we received were summarized in your packet in a 1-pager, and then they were spelled out in detail in the red line version of the draft action plan. Really just want to say that we have an incredibly robust plan. You can see the chart of proposed projects on the right side of the screen there. It's very comprehensive and a lot more projects than we're seeing come out of other places. So we're proud of the effort thus far and ask for your approval.
All right, Commissioners, do you have any questions for our team at this time? Commissioner Ruane.
Just a couple, Glenn. First and foremost, Jeannie and you, thank you for all the time you did, the engagement with the various communities. Maybe just a couple of things. One, walk us through, when the deadline is, what's the time frame for HUD to come on back, and ultimately, what time do you look like in 24? Might we start to do this? And then secondarily, I know we've slotted in categories for dollars and cents, and I know that there's going to be some challenges as you've articulated. I just think it's important for the record for people to understand the challenges and how money could potentially move around as a result of not meeting that particular category.
Yes, sir. Thank you for those questions. So the next time we're before you will be at your next board meeting with the revisions that you authorized today. With the board's approval on September 9th, that will be September 19th. And with your approval then, we will submit to HUD no later than the following day, September 20th. It has to be entered through their grants portal system. That triggers a 60-day period for them to review and respond. We do expect probably some back and forth. They'll probably request some tweaking of the plan, et cetera. We certainly hope to have their approval of our action plan before the end of the calendar year, and that will allow us to roll out programs we think very early in 24, January is what we're shooting for. And then in terms of moving money around in the future, Commissioner Ruane, as you say, this plan will change over time. So what we've proposed here is a great starting point, but it's just that. The community's needs will change over the 6-year life of the program. Some of these programs will be in greater demand than others. And so we will continually reassess these programs and confer with the board about changes that should be made as we go along and reprogramming some of the dollars, just like we did with the ARPA funds. We've made adjustments as we go. It'll be just like that.
Although, so is it fair to say when you were giving displays out in the public at the town hall meetings, you talk about a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3, a phase 4. That's really where the timeline continues to extend. And obviously, as we go through a process, it could potentially move to another item, and it may not necessarily be appropriated and or spent in phase 1. It might go to phase 2 or phase 3. How long do you anticipate this plan from the beginning of our first dollar we spend to potentially our last dollar?
Commissioner, I think from beginning to end, it will take the entire 6 years. Quite honestly, when we look around the country, we don't see anyone having closed these programs out even in 6 years. Now, our goal is certainly to do that. We want to get this money into the community. But realistically, there will be an apex in terms of disbursements. We hope in the first 2 to 3 years. But then on the back end, we will have to make some adjustments as we go, simply because there will be monies that won't be spent in a certain category, as you point out.
And then lastly, I'd like to thank you and Jeannie for all the hard work you did and certainly going out to the community. I really enjoyed participating and certainly observing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, seeing no further questions, then I do have 2 public speakers on this one. First, I'd like to call Mayor Dan Allers from the town of Fort Myers Beach. And then after that, it'll be City Manager Dana Sousa from the city of Sanibel. Oh, good. And yes, I'll call you after Mr. Sousa.
Good morning,
Good
Mr.
morning, Mayor.
Chair, fellow commissioners. Thank you for your service to the county, and thank you to the staff for their hard work on this. We've prepared just a couple of bullet points that we'll get out to you later today in an email that I'll read here to public comment in regards to the staff's recommendations in the report. The first one is the importance of public input. Multiple entities within Lee County, including the city of Fort Myers, city of Sanibel, and the town of Fort Myers Beach, have strongly voiced the need for economic revitalization program during the public consultation phase. Ignoring this critical public input runs the risk of undermining public trust and collaborative governance. Reality of unmet needs. The draft action plan identifies $8.1 billion in unmet needs, including $400 million specifically for economic revitalization. Given that these are identified needs currently, it makes sense to allocate current funds toward them proactively rather than defer them to uncertain future amendments that may or may not occur. Funding allocation. While 56.92% of Lee County's unmet needs are related to housing, 59.57% of CDBG-DR funds have been allocated for housing. This indicates a discrepancy that could be partially rectified by allowing some of those excess funds to economic revitalization projects now. Risk of future inadequacy. The current CDBG-DR allocation of $1.1 billion is already inadequate for meeting the identified unmet needs. If economic revitalization is not prioritized now, there is a reasonable risk that these funds will be fully committed to other projects, leaving zero funding for economic recovery that is badly needed now. Comprehensive recovery strategy. Economic revitalization is an essential part of comprehensive long-term disaster recovery strategy. A balanced approach that addresses both immediate and future needs will yield better outcomes for the whole community. Equitable distribution. While the county argues against designating funds to specific geographical areas, failing to allocate any funds to economic revitalization overlooks the needs of areas like Ground Zero area, which have their own unique recovery challenges. Stakeholder collaboration. Fort Myers Beach and other stakeholders like Sanibel are committed to collaborating on an economic revitalization program. Utilizing this collective expertise will result in a more effective and comprehensive action plan. By proactively addressing these points, Lee County can demonstrate its commitment to a holistic recovery approach that aligns with the needs and priorities of its communities. You know, at a time like this, I go back to what my grandfather used to say all the time. Why put off tomorrow what you can achieve today? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I'd like to call City Manager Dana Sousa from Sanibel. And then after that will be Marcia Ellis.
Thank you, Mr.
Morning.
Chairman, members of the commission, county manager, assistant county manager, thank you very much. We do want to make particular note to thank your county staff. You know that we had a hurricane that scooted our coast last week, and the public meeting on Sanibel had to be rescheduled, and county staff did that lickety-split, and we're grateful that that Sanibel was included in that public comment process. And as you all know, recovering from a hurricane like Hurricane Ian is a significant task, and managing the CDBG-DR funds is also a significant task too. We think that the staff and everyone who has worked on the draft plan has done a good job, but we do have some comments that we'd like to share. Assistant County Manager Salyer said that the plan will be amended multiple times over the course of the 6 years, and we understand and we agree with that process. But as you know, the CDBG-DR funds are provided by the federal government, in response to extraordinary impacts from a disaster. And there's a dilemma particularly here because statutorily, there's a requirement to spend 70% of the funds to those on projects that will benefit low to mod income populations within the county. But it is also required that CDBG-DR funds can only be spent to meet the recovery needs caused by the disaster specifically stated in the appropriation. So there's some tables on page 70 in the action plan. There's the area that shows that, where the total real property FEMA verified lost was, and those include Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach, areas of coastal Lee County, and North Fort Myers area. They exceed 50 million in total loss of damage. So those are the most heavily impacted areas within the community. The action plan also requires that there be demonstrate a reasonable proportion allocation of resources relative to areas and categories, including housing, economic revitalization, and infrastructure. And as the mayor from Fort Myers Beach just mentioned, what's missing in the current allocation is economic revitalization. One step that could be considered is that within the rules, the CDBG-R funds may seek to reduce the overall requirement below 70% of the total grant, but the grantee must submit a substantial amendment to the action plan. So considering that the coastal areas received catastrophic damage and that we are not an area where the low moderate income populations reside, we think that this is a tough balancing act, and we'd like to seek consideration either at the outset or a substantial amendment after the plan has been submitted to consider reducing from 70% LMI to 50% LMI. The mayor from Fort Myers Beach has also said, and in their comments, it states that there's $8 billion of unmet needs in the county overall, and that housing is makes up 56.92% of that. However, within the CDBG-DR allocations, should I wrap up? Okay, there is 59.57%. If that is reduced by 2.65%, it would free up 29.4 million that could be immediately directed to economic revitalization. We know that the county has not focused on that, but we can work with the county staff and other most affected areas on what the needs around economic revitalization are. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Souza. All right, at this time, I'd like to call Marcia Ellis.
Thank you, Commissioners. Marcia Ellis for the record. I'm going to speak just briefly about the comments, the public comments that have been submitted regarding the funds. First of all, I want to call attention to the maps that show the overlay of the low to mod income area as presented on the CDBG-DR site. I have an issue with that because the area that is identified as low mod around the airport, north of Alico Road up to State Road 82 is a very low density area. And in the report that as it's presented, it doesn't present the density or show the population centers. And that's really important. And I see that as a big oversight, something that should have happened in this report so we can get a handle where people live. To take that map and take those low to mod funds and invest it in an area that is not identified as having a high percentage of renters, as being risk burdened or a mortgage burdened population is a disservice to the community members here and a disservice to folks out on Fort Myers Beach in particular who do qualify as low mod income and do deserve to get some economic revitalization as a priority right away. In the report, it was identified that there were 4,742 directly hurricane impacted low to mod households identified. But we are only proposing to serve 2,800 of those households. There's a lot of money, 25 million going to planning this, planning that, infrastructure this, using the money to meet matching funds. I want to see this money get into the pockets of the low to mod households who have been directly impacted that we can even more precisely identify. I also have an issue with data presented not separating elders from children because I think that that will impact the outreach that goes forward. I will also say that that the overall climate in this community of the housing being dictated by and monopolized by the multi-res industry, which is in fact an investment vehicle, can continue to get repeated. We're not doing anything to break the cycle and create real permanent affordability. Currently, we're looking at recapture as the primary means to protect those funds, and that is inadequate when we need to be extending that period of permanent affordability well beyond the 20 years as currently proposed. So in my comments, I took the time to be very precise and try to represent the public interest after participating in a number of these meetings as a member of the public. And I ask that you please carefully consider those comments as brought forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Does anybody else wish to speak on this item, number 7? Okay, I see no further speakers, so we'll come back to the board. Commissioners, any questions at this time?
Just
Commissioner Ruane?
a thought. I hear loudly and clearly what the community is looking for. Economic development is really important. I think so many areas have been. I think as late in the game as it is, we can certainly be open-minded to do that. I would say that on an amendment as opposed to delaying this, and potentially what I learned certainly through this process is there's an awful lot of data that you have to submit into various categories. And while economic development is great, we would need to have some type of comprehensive submission for an amendment. And perhaps I would, as one person, would want to talk to John Talmadge, and maybe we can talk about this sometime in the future. But right now, given the late time, I think it's just really late in the game to try to do an amendment right now without adequate documentation. My understanding, and Glenn, correct me any place where I'm wrong, each item that we submit will have some type of documentation. At this late stage, I'm 100% for economic development. I don't know that we have the adequate material to submit to obviously receive this plan, and would love to work on that opportunity and maybe perhaps have a more robust conversation for maybe it's our first amendment. I hear the community, understand what the community needs, and certainly want to help that community do so, but we need to obviously have a plan that we understand, and more importantly, that's going to be successful.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. And just to follow up to those comments as well, Mr. Harner, if you could direct it to the appropriate person, I believe it'll be Mr. Salyer. But, when we've asked in our briefings about the economic revitalization aspect of this, you guys have shared with me your thought process behind the way our action plan was set up the way it is. So could you just share that today? What was the thought process behind the way we handled the economic revitalization aspect of this plan?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So to follow on Commissioner Ruane's comments, we are certainly eager to work with the municipalities to see if we could effectuate a program design that businesses can actually utilize. The technical challenges of the economic revitalization program under CDBGDR are many. It's a complicated program in every instance, but particularly for that program. And so figuring out which businesses would be eligible, we heard a lot about working capital loans. Is that the program that would be needed? And if so, how can we actually do that in an effective way that's successful? Or is it something different than that? The questions are many. We do have to document the data, the need. And we also have to design a program that keeps us secure as a county who's ultimately responsible for repaying any funds that don't work out. And I guess I would just point out, when we look at the state of Florida, for instance, they got about $1 billion too. They've proposed 4 programs. We have 14. They don't have economic revitalization. They only have, it's just, there's a reason why it's a complicated affair and it's not in the initial draft. But we're absolutely committed to working with them on program design if the board wants us to do that.
Just to follow up on that, one of the things we talked about, this is obviously federal money. It's not going to come without strings attached. We're going to be heavily audited on how we use this money and held accountable. And potentially money could be clawed back from the federal government if we don't use it appropriately. What did you find out was the most clawed back area and when the CDBGDR grants have been given to communities.
Yes, sir. It is this program far and away.
So the economic revitalization is the most clawed back area. So it's important to go into it with a really solid game plan to make sure that if you are going to do that particular part of this, you don't lose money or have to be on the hook to pay it back.
We just want to do it right if we're going to do it.
Okay, that makes sense. Commissioner Ruane?
Mr. Chairman, thanks for your comments. I mean, to follow up exactly what you're indicating, I think we're more than open to a conversation and trying to have what we may have learned from past history to obviously have a potential greater time to be successful in this. I think there's a lot of information we need to learn to be able to do so. And that's why initially I was talking about amendment later. We have an opportunity to gather the necessary information, look at some of the other plans that may not have been successful. Yeah, I think it's important, and most people don't realize that Lee County is awarded this dollar amount and in potential as the guarantor, if you will, on a loan. If there's money actually that needs to go back, Lee County will actually have to put it up first. So let's look at this, and that's why I indicated before in my earlier comments to do this as an amendment later on, when we understand some of the challenges, when we understand some of the opportunities, and see if we could navigate and put that needle, and really needle that, really fine line and getting it to be successful.
Commissioners, I need a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion to move the
And
item.
I'll second it.
Okay, the motion for approval is from Commissioner Greenwell and the seconds from Commissioner Ruane. Do we have any further discussion on this? Okay. Are there any, seeing no further discussion, then at this time I'll call the question. Are there any objections? No objections? Then that motion carries unanimously. All right, let's move to item number 8. Mr. Harder, please introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to approve FDEM waiver of local match grant agreement for Hurricane Ian recovery, and I'd like to ask Mr. Winton to present the item.
Commissioners, last December, when the legislature held a special session on Hurricanes Ian and Nicole, the legislature set aside a $350 million fund to pay for local matches for reimbursement of costs that the local entities incurred. This is primarily from FEMA. So FEMA pays a percentage of our reimbursed costs. The state pays a percentage, and then the county has a percentage. This program will pay the county's percentage on behalf of the county. This agenda item before you today is to opt into that process.
Very good. Commissioners, any questions on the item?
A follow-up for
Ruane?
Pete. Pete, I appreciate it. I know there was, I don't know if it's this $350 million tranche or the other, was tied into utilizing and exhausting revenue replacement. Is that still the case?
Yes, there's another $350 million bucket, so to speak,
A different bucket.
set aside during the session and regular session, and the county has submitted a number of requests for that funding also.
But one of the caveats or that we have to, or the intent was that the legislator wanted us to, I guess, exhaust the revenue replacement dollars before the 350 was being utilized.
The bridge loan. So there's
Correct.
$100 million of potential bridge loan capacity. And right now, I believe it's only subscribed about $50 million, which is town of Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, and the county.
So that could be an impediment to actually receive some grant dollars with that other 350 if that's
Correct.
exhausted.
But that $350 million is oversubscribed many times, and
Right.
it looks like a lot of that potentially will just be used for working capital.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, seeing no further questions, I'd like to go to public comment on item number 8. I believe, no. Does anybody wish to speak on administrative agenda item number 8? Okay, I see no hands then. We'll come back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion?
With item.
Motion
I'll
for
second
approval
it.
from Commissioner Pendergrass, second from Commissioner Ruane. Do we have any discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. Let's move to administrative agenda item number 9. Mr. Harner, please introduce the item.
Good morning, Commissioners. Pam Keys, Lee County Utility. The next 3 items that I'll be talking about are all part of the utilities recovery from Ian. This first item is to approve a sole source purchase of submersible lift station control panels. During Ian, we had about 100 lift stations that were damaged due to storm surge. This will help us to harden those lift stations and be better prepared for future storms. This program has been approved by the DEP Hurricane Stormwater and Wastewater Assistance Grant Program, and most of the funding will come from that grant.
Very good. Any questions, commissioners, on this? Okay, I see no questions then. Thank you. At this time, we'll take public comment on item number 9. Has anyone come to speak on administrative agenda item number 9? Okay, I see no hands. Back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Move the item.
Okay, motion from Commissioner Ruane, second from Commissioner Sandelli. Any discussion on that? Okay, I see no discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries unanimously. All right, go ahead, Mr. Harner, and please introduce item 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to accept the FDEP Hurricane Stormwater and Wastewater Assistance Grant funding. I'd like to ask Ms. Keys to present the item.
Commissioners, this is a grant for $4.7 million. It will cover the lift station control panel project I just spoke on. It will also help us with the Fort Myers Beach Water Reclamation Facility electrical support system project. These funds were specifically set aside for wastewater facilities to recover from Ian damages.
Okay, commissioners, any questions on this item? All right, I see no questions. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on administrative agenda item 10? I see no hands. Back to the board. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Gladly will move the item. Just for record, this is a grant given to us by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Just want that on the record.
Thank you very much. Any, so we have a motion for approval from Commissioner Ruane. Second is from Commissioner Greenwell. Any discussion or questions on that? Okay, I see no discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. And then Mr. Harner, please introduce item 11.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to approve piggyback purchase for switchgear replacement. I'd like to ask Ms. Keys to present this item as well.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is a piggyback purchase for our Fort Myers Beach Water Reclamation Facility switchgear replacement. Procurement management helped us with a market analysis and found that by using this procurement process, we could potentially save 5% of the cost to comparable projects. This is funded by Resilient Florida grant funds, which have been awarded. We anticipate that we'll bring back that agreement to the board for your approval in October or November of this year.
Very good. Commissioners, what questions do you have on this item? Okay, I see none. At this time, I'll call for public comment. Does anybody wish to speak on administrative agenda item 11, the piggyback purchase for switchgear replacement? Okay, I see no speakers, so we'll come back to the board. Does somebody wish to make a motion for approval from Commissioner Sandelli and the seconds from Commissioner Greenwell? Any further discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries unanimously. Good work today. All right, we'll move to our public hearing agenda. This is our 9:30 public hearing agenda, and the first item is issuance of HFA multifamily housing revenue bonds. At this time, I'd like to recognize our county attorney's office.
Good morning, Commissioners. Andrea Fraser with your first, second, third, and fourth public hearing for the HFA financing multifamily bonds. I have your affidavit of publication for all 4 items and find them legally sufficient in form and content to proceed with the public hearing at this time.
Very good. Commissioners, any questions on this item? Yeah, I see no questions on this item. Has anyone come to speak on public hearing number 1? Okay, I see no hands. Back to the board. Does somebody wish to make a motion?
I'll move the item.
Motion for approval from Commissioner Ruane, seconds from Commissioner Greenwell. Any discussion on this item? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. Please introduce item number 2 under public hearings. Oh, so she did all, okay, very good. Mr. Halverson, if you'll hold on then, since we've read our affidavit for 2, 3, and 4, I'll go ahead and move through 2, 3, and 4, and then I'll call you back up there. All right, so item number 2 is approving the issuance of HFA multifamily revenue bonds for Pine Echo Apartments. Commissioners, any questions on this item? All right, at this time, we'll go to the public. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on public hearing number 2? Okay, I see no speakers. Back to the board with
Move the item.
motion for approval from Commissioner Ruane and second from Commissioner Greenwell. Any further discussion? Any objection? No objection. That motion carries unanimously. All right, item number 3 under public hearings is to approve the issuance of HFA multifamily revenue bonds for ARIA Landings. Commissioners, do you have any questions on this item? Okay, I see no questions. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on public hearing number 3 at this time? Okay, I see no speakers. Back to the board.
I'll move the item.
Motion for approval from Commissioner Wayne.
Second.
Commissioner Greenwell. Any further discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. And item number 4 is approving the issuance of HFA multifamily revenue bonds for crossings at Cape Coral. Any questions on this one? I see no questions. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on public hearing number 4? Okay, I see no speakers. Back to the board.
I'll move the item.
Okay, the motion for approval is from Commissioner Ruane, and the second is from Commissioner Greenwell. Do we have any discussion? All right, I see no discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. All right, Mr. Halverson, please introduce item number 5. Morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. David Halverson, County Attorney's Office. I have your 5th public hearing item this morning. This item has been duly advertised, and I've provided the affidavit of publication to the clerk. Thank you. Item number 5 is a petition to vacate the public's interest in a portion of an unimproved 30-foot wide platted right-of-way located between Lot 2 and Lot 3 on the San Carlos Grove tract plat in Fort Myers. There were no objections to the requested vacation, and staff has opined that this vacation will not alter any existing utility or drainage operations. If there are any questions, staff's available, and I believe the attorney for the petitioner is present as well.
Very good. Any questions on this item? Okay, I see no questions. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on public hearing 5? Okay, I see no hands. Would you like to speak, Mr. Hartzell?
Steve Hartzell for the record, here on behalf of the petitioners, only if you have questions.
Any questions for the attorney? Okay, I see none.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartzell. All right, if there are no further speakers then, at this time, we'll come back to the board. Does somebody wish to make a motion? Motion for approval from Commissioner Sandelli.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Greenwell. Any discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. Please introduce public hearing number 6.
Good morning, Commissioners. Amanda Swindle at the County Attorney's Office. I have your public hearing item number 6, which has been duly advertised. This public hearing is to adopt a resolution which would approve a rate increase for the Gasparilla Island Water Association. Board approval is required pursuant to our franchise agreement with the association. This item would also authorize the county manager to approve future annual rate increases not to exceed the CPI index, which is in line with the resolution adopted by the Water Association. Utility staff is here if you have any questions.
Very good. Commissioners, any questions on this item? All right, I see no questions. Thanks, Ms. Swindell. Has anyone come to speak on public hearing number 6? The Gasparilla Water Association. Okay, I see no speakers. Back to the board.
Move the item.
Motion for approval from Commissioner Pendergrass, second from Commissioner Ruane. Any discussion? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously. Item number 7.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know item 7 and 8 may take some time. I was just wondering if we could make a recommendation to move public hearing item number 9 forward first.
Yeah, that actually, Commissioners, any objections to the idea of taking care of public hearing number 9? All right. At this time, please introduce public hearing number 9, and then we'll go back to 7, which 7 is the Land Development Code.
Good morning, Commissioners. The item for you is item number 9, adopt a resolution approving issuance of educational facilities revenues bonds. We're here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Was there any affidavit of publication that needed to be?
We're going to get that and provide that to the clerk.
For number 9? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Commissioners, on number 9, the educational facilities revenue bonds, do you have any questions? No? Okay, I see no questions. Let me go to the public. This is public hearing number 9. This is adopting a resolution approving issuance of educational facilities revenue bonds. Does anyone come to speak on that item? Okay, I see a speaker. Yep, please come forward.
Thank you, Marcia Ellis. I'm just going to say that I have some concerns when we are, there are special privileges that are given to the development of charter schools and private school facilities, and I understand those roles. And in fact, I think that cooperation with community development and Lee County government is very important so that those facilities are leveraged to the benefit of our community. I'm also concerned that sometimes that the funds that could be used to the benefit of the community can get misappropriated in ways that may not benefit everyone equally. And when we have a robust public school system that values equitable distribution of facilities throughout the community, I think it's a win for everyone because children throughout this community deserve a fair, equal education. It's to benefit us all. So I have a bit of a problem when facilities are funded, charter school or private school facilities are too much heavily bent on benefiting certain parts of the community and not other parts of the community. So as a general rule, I tend to side with the protections that allotting resources, public resources, our money as taxpayers to privately owned facilities. I tend to err on the side of caution so that those facilities are equitably distributed throughout the community. So I don't support using public funds for charter or private school facilities based on that erring on the side of caution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further speakers on this item? Okay, I see no
Move the item,
further
Chairman.
speakers. We have a motion for approval from Commissioner Pendergrass and the second from Commissioner Greenwell. Do we have any further discussion on this item? Okay, I see no further discussion. Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Ruane.
No, we have procurement and then we're going to have land development. I don't want to necessarily want to get up in the middle of land development, but would it be appropriate to take a break now as opposed to in the middle of that?
I think that's fine. I think if there's no objection, let's go ahead and stand in recess until 11 a.m. And we'll take up land development code at 11 a.m.
Thank you. Mother Nature called.
Good job. to item number 7 on the public hearing agenda. But let's do item number 8. Let's go ahead and get to the Land Development Code amendments. I know we have a huge crowd here who is interested in this topic, and I thank you all for waiting with us as we got through the big portion of our agenda today. So let's go ahead and take up the item number 8 under public hearings. If we need to do the affidavit of publication, let's go ahead and start with that. Ms. Swindell, you're recognized.
Good morning. Again, Amanda Swindle with the County Attorney's Office for the record. Public hearing item number 8 is consideration of amendments to the Lee County Land Development Code. This item was originally advertised for the June 20th meeting where it was continued until today. And it has been re-advertised. During this time period, staff has worked with the community to do some outreach and conduct some informational sessions. And I believe Assistant County Manager Mark Mora would like to provide an update of those meetings for you.
Very good. Mr. County Manager, please introduce your team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the, we originally had scheduled the August 29th workshop. Unfortunately, due to Hurricane Idalia, we had to cancel that meeting. We'd like to do that presentation now, and I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Mora for that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. Good morning again, Commissioners. Before Anthony begins the presentation, I would like to review a timeline that is related to these proposed amendments and the direction the board has provided staff. I don't know if we can start the presentation, please. Thank you very much. On January 17th, the board directed staff to amend regulations that address countywide height, setbacks, and other development limitations, potentially restricting ability to rebuild homes and businesses in a manner that reduces potential flooding threats. These proposed amendments to the Land Development Code were presented as required to both the LDC-AC and the LPA. Both those committees approved the proposals and recommended moving the items to the board for consideration. And you can see from this timeline, the board directed to public hearing these proposed amendments on June 6th. The public hearing was held on June 20th. At that time, the board directed staff to continue the public hearings to September 5th. During that timeline, during that period, beginning on July 13th, staff did go to Captiva, Pine Island, Sanibel, and we held a session here at Fort Myers to engage with the community and hear input. Also, a presentation similar to what you're seeing today was presented by Anthony, and we made clarifications of any misunderstandings of the proposals at the time. Bless you. As Mr. Hunter mentioned, August 29th was a scheduled workshop, and unfortunately, because of the storm, we had to cancel. So we are here today on September 5th, hearing these LDC amendments. Tomorrow, there will be a public hearing of the Lee Plan amendments that are companions to these proposed amendments. So Anthony, I will now turn the presentation over to you. Anthony is a community development manager who will provide an overview of the proposed amendments and summarize the community input heard during the public meetings.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
For the record, my name is Anthony Rodriguez. I am the Zoning Section Manager with the Department of Community Development. And I'm going to take you through the technical aspects of the proposed Land Development Code amendments. But before I do that, I wanted to just kind of take a moment to summarize some of the public comments we heard during our public outreach exercise over the summer. We heard, by and large, from a variety of members of the community. And really what we've heard can be kind of distilled down into these 6 bullet points before you. The first thing we've heard is that the proposed amendments will allow unlimited height on Captiva. The proposed amendments will also remove all density restrictions. We also heard some concerns and speculation about what South Seas and the Timbers Group in particular are going to do with respect to future development of the property. We did also hear some support from rebuilding usable space above base flood elevation. We also heard a request for staff to look at build-back provisions that are codified in the Land Development Code and the Post-Disaster Ordinance to eliminate some possible inconsistencies, to allow development that is both marketable and insurable. And we also heard a desire from the communities to keep the height regulations that are related to community plan areas in particular in Chapter 33 where they're currently located. So the proposed amendments before you today are really intended to achieve kind of 3 things: regulatory certainty, insurability, and economic resiliency. So we talk about resiliency. Resiliency really is a broad term that can be defined as a variety of things. But it is really more than the construction methods we use to build buildings. It's more than environmental preservation and restoration, and it's more than just development itself. Economic resiliency is critical to a successful recovery and to assuring social resiliency, getting folks back to work after a storm event, preventing those long-term business disruptions we see when we have that storm event, and also allowing businesses to change and adapt to market conditions. So the Height amendments before you today are intended to provide insurability, which in turn provides that economic resilience, in addition to that resilience that we see within the built environment. And then finally, I want to touch on a little bit of regulatory certainty, which is another way that the county can be resilient. When people and property owners have an understanding of how regulations apply to their situation, that benefits all parties. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the proposed amendments before you today. The first thing I want to touch on is how the county currently regulates and measures building height. What you see here is language and terminology that's currently used in the Land Development Code that speaks to building height. So we have starting points, which is where we start our building height measurement. And as you can see, we have a little bit more than a half dozen terms that we use in the Land Development Code to establish that starting point. Some of these terms are defined either in the Land Development Code or elsewhere, and some of them are not defined, leaving staff to make an interpretation as to what that actually means. With respect to finishing points, largely dictated by what the building is designed to look like, and largely dictated by that roof structure that a building has. So what we're proposing to do is we're proposing to establish one uniform way to measure building height countywide. The starting point, pardon me, is the lowest minimum habitable floor elevation for which a building permit could be issued. That term is tied either to predefined regulations in our Land Development Code, it's tied to Florida Building Code, it's tied to FEMA flood hazard area regulations. And the finishing point, again, we take it to whatever the roof style is. Depending on the roof style, we take it to a specific point as noted here on the slide. In addition to identifying that single way to measure building height, we're also proposing to incorporate what we're calling a resiliency elevation. This is really going to apply to those coastal A and B flood zones. Those are the areas of the county that are not only vulnerable to storm surge, but are also vulnerable to that wave action that you see with storm events. This is going to provide that increased flexibility and resiliency. And essentially what it's going to allow is areas within coastal A and B zones to be developed with buildings that have additional freeboard incorporated into it up to a maximum of 4 feet, with the building height being taken from the freeboard plus whatever number of feet to whatever the finishing point is for the building. Wanted to provide some context relative to flood hazard areas in the county. This is the county's flood insurance rate map, which was recently changed last November. As you can see, flood hazard areas, which are denoted here in blue and red and purple, they stretch from west to east, north to south. They really are throughout Lee County. So this is a countywide amendment that is going to help to clarify and streamline our existing regulations to make things easier to administer and to provide that certainty to the public as they want to develop their properties and businesses. There are some individual amendments that pertain to South Seas Island Resort in this particular package. As some of you may be aware, South Seas is governed by an administrative interpretation that was adopted by the Department of Community Development as directed by the board back in 2002. That administrative interpretation establishes development parameters, and it will remain in effect if the proposed amendments are adopted. And the only way that we could supersede that particular administrative interpretation is through a public hearing application to rezone the South Seas Resort property. The proposed amendments before you today do not change the development parameters of this administrative interpretation. What they do is they remove references to this particular administrative interpretation to allow South Seas to proceed through that normal rezoning process, adds a definition for South Seas and a corresponding map, and also treats South Seas hotels the same way that hotels are treated throughout the rest of Lee County. As we touched on through the
question, yeah, Commissioner Pendergrass. Go ahead.
Thank you for all the information. I'm just trying to make sure we stay on top of this because it's the last few months, I think there was 2 conversations going on. And thank you for clarifying some of that information today, but I wanted to go back to some earlier. You had public comment, some of the concerns of people obviously thinking it's unlimited density, unlimited heights. You just confirmed that, and this is your last presentation here. But, so South Seas itself, this is a county-wide ordinance, but South Seas will still be under the zoning regulations as it would be before, right? It doesn't change that. The amendments does not change that part.
The administrative interpretation that exists will continue to govern until such point that an application to rezone the property.
So
is filed.
anything for future height, since people are concerned about the height, or more rooms for competition, that would be through a zoning process.
Correct.
Okay,
That's correct.
thank you.
Real quick, can I clarify what you just said, Anthony? So you said the administrative interpretation will continue to govern until an application, but really it's not until an application. You can apply for anything. It's until approval through the regular hearing examiner and then ultimately by the board process, right? So there's a whole lot of steps between any new entitlements, correct?
Absolutely correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks very much.
I apologize for the misstatement.
No, no worries. I'm not trying to correct you. I just know that this is something that, this is really what a lot of people are most interested in today. So I want to make sure I say it clearly.
That's why I
Commissioner
wanted to ask
Pendergrass?
him here again, so everybody hears every word, that it doesn't approve that automatically. Some people are being told this automatically be an unlimited height or 75 feet or whatever the number may be that they create in their misinformation, that this action would do that. And just make sure we get that this action before us today we're voting on is not a zoning application. It's not approval for any other increase of density or heights.
That's correct.
Right. Thank you.
Any further questions before we get back to? Okay, you may continue your presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So what I wanted to touch on also, because we heard some public comment on it, is the build back provisions of the Land Development Code and the Post-Disaster Ordinance. The Land Development Code currently nests its build back provisions under non-conforming structures. And what it basically allows is it allows a non-conforming structure to be rebuilt or replaced to its actual use, density, or intensity that existed at the time of its destruction. It also allows restoration to the size, style, and type of original construction, including its original square footage. The proposed amendments will, by and large, help by clarifying how height is measured and establishing that one standard throughout unincorporated Lee County. And it will also allow for that additional elevation for resiliency and insurability to allow further enhancements to built back buildings and structures. One thing that we did want to touch on and we wanted to identify for your consideration is that there seems to be a gap between non-conforming buildings and structures and how build back applies to that particular set of circumstances, but not applying to conforming buildings and structures. And so there are amendments that staff believes need to occur to apply this build back policy more broadly to conforming buildings and structures as well. Wanted to illustrate some of the impetus for these amendments as it relates to new construction, and I'm using South Seas as an example. So on the left-hand side, you see how height is measured in South Seas Resort by that administrative interpretation, and it's either the lesser of 35 feet from grade to the midpoint of the roof, or 42 feet from sea level to the midpoint of the roof. When we have building height regulations that don't necessarily speak to compliance with Florida Building Code and FEMA requirements, we end up with a situation where we're squeezing the actual livable area of a building. So on the right-hand side, the red rectangles are intended to represent those, a building that gets built subject to height regulations that do not incorporate any sort of base flood elevation compliance or any sort of building code compliance. And the red rectangles are intended to illustrate the areas of the building that get kind of wiped away by ultimately being built. So that volume of building is lost in order to comply with FEMA and Florida Building Code standards. The final thing I wanted to touch on, and this goes back to the public comment slide that I started off the presentation with, is the concern about the proposed amendments allowing for unlimited density. Density is a function or a term that we use to identify the number of residential dwelling units per gross acre. It is tied to the county's comprehensive plan, the LEA plan, and each future land use category has a maximum residential density assigned with it. On the other side of the coin, you have intensity, which is a measurement of non-residential uses, and it's typically based on architectural features or architectural character of a building, demand on public services, traffic, water, sewer. So those two terms are separate and apart, and they regulate two separate elements of development: residential on the density side, non-residential on the intensity side. As it relates to hotels, hotels that are approved as part of a planned development, they are not subject to the density limitation by current regulations except for in Captiva. And all other aspects of development, including height, traffic, intensity of use, and other development program elements, must be compatible with the surrounding area and must also be consistent with the LEED plan. And those two criteria in particular are important because those are two of a broader set of criteria that staff and the hearing examiner and then ultimately this board uses to evaluate whether or not a request meets the criteria for rezoning. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention as well. In conclusion, that summarizes the presentation we have for you today. Staff is available to answer any questions you all have, and we'll be available too through the public input process for further clarification.
Okay, commissioners, what questions do you have for our staff at this time?
None right now.
Commissioner,
Love to.
got a question?
Sure. Anthony, I know you went through an awful lot of different meetings. If you could quickly summarize for the commissioners where we were June 6th and where we are today, the obviously input that was substantive and changed.
Well, staff has not made any changes to the ordinance that's before you today. We've summarized public comment. We've heard the community. We've heard their concerns. We could potentially be in a position if this board would like to walk through some changes. That would require some time to pull together though. Is that your question, Commissioner?
I guess, one of the things that was very confusing was certainly build back, and I thought we clarified there would be a lot of ambiguity associated with build back. So that was one that, obviously love to hear your thoughts on that. Did we strengthen build back? Is it clearer? Is there less ambiguity associated with that?
I think there's an opportunity to further clarify and eliminate any ambiguity and inconsistencies as it relates to build back. Ultimately, like I said in the presentation, the way that build back currently applies is to non-conforming buildings and structures as it's determined as it's defined in the land development code. We have an opportunity to broaden that, to further clarify that, and to allow for a very clear regulation that helps to eliminate that ambiguity and inconsistency that I think sometimes we have a hard time wrestling with.
Thank you.
Any further questions then at this time?
I just want to say, I attended some of the public meetings and I've obviously been engaged the last few months with all the parties on each side. I learned a lot. I was really concerned early on hearing that from the fire department, they had concerns about safety, obviously public safety background. And, talk to the members of the fire department. I think I've learned a lot that they don't have a ladder truck now. They currently have over 39-foot buildings out there now. They have to service with multi-agencies. I do that from a few weeks ago too. So I was concerned because I had some fire personnel come to me and saying they were kind of pushed to come before and send us that letter a few months ago against this. And it's unfortunate, but I look forward to voting on this in a few minutes.
Very good. If there are no further questions, does this conclude the presentation then, Mr. Harner?
Yes, it does, Commissioner.
Okay, so if this concludes the presentation, then now's a good time to go ahead and take the public comment? Correct? Okay. All right, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing up to public comment. Before we start with public comment, let me just kind of share with you how it's going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and call a speaker, and then at the same time that I call the speaker, like for instance, I'll call Mayor Richard Johnson. I'll go ahead and say, and the next speaker is, and I'll call the next speaker's name. If that person who's on deck getting ready to speak could kind of go stand at the back of the room by the doors there and be ready to come up. That way we'll keep the things flowing as quickly as possible. When you come up, you don't need to touch the microphone. It's actually a really sensitive microphone, and when you touch it, it goes kind of crazy. So don't touch the microphone. There is at the top corner of the podium, you can probably see it right there, a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. Everybody will get 3 minutes to talk. Because we have a large number of speakers today, I'm going to go ahead and be pretty strict on that. So when the yellow light comes on, that's when, just like at a traffic light, you're going to want to start to think about whether you should stop or not. And then when the red light comes on, I'm going to call the next speaker. And just, we always try to adhere to the rules of decorum in a county commission meeting. So try our very best not to make any personal attacks or make it personal. Direct your comments through the chair. No clapping or cheering or booing or hissing or anything that might intimidate people or make them feel uncomfortable to talk. And with that, I'll go ahead and call our first speaker. Our first speaker is Mayor Richard Johnson from Sanibel. Mayor, good morning. Please make your way to the podium. And then after that will be Christy Anders. Good morning, Mayor.
Mr. Chair, good morning. And thank you, Vice Chair Greenwell as well as the commissioners. I want to say, before I get started with my comments, I'm joined here by my colleagues, Vice Mayor Miller, Councilwoman Smith, Councilman Crater, Councilman John Henshaw would be here, but unfortunately he's not available this morning. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I very much appreciate that the commission recognized that they are going to have, we needed to move this date back to this hearing today because it most importantly provided an opportunity for the public to engage. I know as we looked at that timeline, there looked like there were other opportunities. Quite honestly, it didn't become apparent what was going on. So I think it's very important that this date was pushed back. And I want to thank the commission for doing that. It was the right thing to do. And we'll talk about right things to do in just a minute as well. I want to thank staff for preparing and coming out and meeting with us and providing the information that we have. Earlier today, I sat in the audience and listened, and the topic of voices came out. And I think that's very important because there are a number of voices, as you have a stack of comment cards there with you. There's a number of voices here. And I'd just like to mention a couple of them. Captiva Community Panel, Captiva Civic Association, SCCF, Dean Darling Wildlife Society, Crow, Committee of the Islands, City of Sanibel, representing our residents, business owners, and island guests. City Council itself, City Attorney John Agnew, as well as our City Manager, Mr. Souza, and his staff. We're talking about all those voices, and I appreciate that you're taking the time to listen to all those voices. And I will say, all those voices speak out that as the Land Development Code changes are illustrated today, they're in opposition to those changes. I think what we have is we have an opportunity to refer this back to staff and take the opportunity to consider all that input that they've received and be able to make a great recommendation to this board to move forward with the changes. I want to mention that the Timbers Group, the business that's there on the island, it's not that we don't want that business to be successful. Absolutely the contrary. I want them to be successful. But I want them to operate, we want them to operate under the laws that were in existence when they purchased the property. I know they pursued due diligence. I know Timbers is a great organization and they really know what they're doing. I'm sure they were aware of the restrictions they had placed upon them as they purchased that property. So I'd ask that you reject these LDC amendments today, as they stand today, refer that back to staff so they can come make a recommendation that would be more fitting with the communities. We see this as a terrible, terrible lack of consideration for the island of Sanibel, because remember, as we all know, you've got to go through Sanibel to get to Captiva. Thank you very much for your time today, and I appreciate hearing your comments and as we go on.
Okay, I'll call Christy Anders, followed by Wilton Anders. Good morning.
Morning. South Seas was built on the reputation of less means more. Less density meant more value. And if you look at the taxable value of Captiva, you can see that it succeeded in doing that all over the island. What we've been hearing and what we've discussed has made no difference in what's before you today. Absolutely no difference whatsoever. And yet, I've watched Captiva drive a road away twice in 1 month, to the point where emergency trucks have had to come out and put fill in there. Captiva is a third of the size it once was. Captiva's cemetery was not on the beach. It was the second ridge back, and that's all gone. Because this is a really dynamic area, and this part of the county cannot be treated the way the rest of the county is treated. Captiva is unique. This commission, in years past, has invested money through the Tourist Development Council to make Captiva a different destination than any place else. It has invested money in its community panel to retain its unique characteristics. And what you're about to vote on throws all that out the window, because you're asking to eliminate the code as it's written to protect the island the way it is today. and I object that the code be changed to the convenience of one business. 1/3 of South Seas, not all of South Seas, it's 1/3 of South Seas that they're asking to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you. Wilton Anders, followed by Alex Johns.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Wilton Anders. I'm a fisherman and Sanibel resident. I'm also bought property on Pine Island, which height regulations will have a considerable amount to do with. But I wanted to bring to you the facts that after Hurricane Ian came through, I was fishing Redfish Pass that used to be 32 feet deep along the rocks at South Seas. Immediately after the hurricane, it went to 42 feet. And a lot of the pass going across was 5 to 7 feet deeper. The rocks and stuff that were on the embankment kept a lot of the South Seas from flowing into the pass, but there's between the rocks and the limestone that's down at 42 feet that I was seeing scoured out after the hurricane, that's now filled back in with 6 feet of sand. So it looks a lot better. But there's a sand layer between the rocks up top and the rocks underneath. Redfish Pass was created with 3 different hurricanes in the 1920s. It wasn't there before. It used to all be one island. And with the scouring and stuff that is accomplished between then and now, it's grown to be a half-mile wide and considerable depth. There is no navigational channel that was constant coming into Redfish Pass and going to the Intercoastal Canal because they used to try to cut it straight through. It kept flooding and sand built into every time a hurricane or major storm would come through, and they'd have to redredge the channel. Finally, a few years ago, they'd redug the channel under its natural flow that wraps around South Seas, comes into the south, and then goes back out to the Intercoastal Canal. But the storms changed that bottom. Every storm that comes across is totally different, depending on the weather or the wind direction and how strong the weather gets. So if the people at South Seas think that it's gonna last by just putting a few more rocks in, I think they're sadly mistaken. Also, I've noticed at South Seas that they've built up 4 to 5 feet on the golf course there that they were showing so nicely in the picture worth of sand. So now the existing ground level is taller than what it was. And if they go from the existing ground level that they have now and ask to add the 8 to 10 feet, then it's a lot different than the surveyed ground for the golf course that was last year. You can change the existing ground level just by bringing in lots of loads of dirt, which they have done. So the fact that they can't make any money off of their 160 apartment or hotel dwellings they have now, and they want twice that much, is not a truth. They got that price at $250,000 per unit. Thank you.
Alex Johns, followed by Bill Finley.
Hi, Commissioners. I think there was a mistake. I was trying to speak after the non-conforming billboard section, not the. At the end.
Okay.
At the end. I think the place.
Non-conforming billboard section, which is
Yes.
part of the land development code. Okay, so you want to talk at the very end of public comment because you're talking related to the billboard.
Yeah, regarding what you guys speak about the non-conforming billboard, at the, I think it was the end of public hearing.
I don't, if we could just pause the timer real quick. Mr. County Manager, I don't believe we were going to do any part where we break out the billboard parts of this.
Okay.
So contrary to what we're going to hear today, this is not just all South Seas. This is actually land development code that relates to multiple sections of the county's land development code. And one of the amendments relates to billboards and non-conforming billboards. So could we just have a quick introduction on that, and then we could listen to your comment if that's okay. Just 30 seconds on the billboard part of it so that at least we understand that part of it. I apologize. I know this is kind of unorthodox because we got public comment started, but then we can just take your comment and then we'll move on.
Oh, that's okay. You're good. Sit there. Good morning again. For the record, Anthony Rodriguez. You're correct, Commissioner Hammond. This particular ordinance does include provisions that modify relocations of non-conforming billboards. Currently, what's in our sign code is we have the ability, or billboard owner has the ability to replace two non-conforming billboards in exchange for constructing a new non-conforming billboard. Remove two, replace one. That billboard becomes conforming. The amendments that are part of the package today allow for a one-time relocation of a billboard that was exchanged on the 2-for-1, is what staff refers to it as. So when you've taken two non-conforming billboards, you've taken them down, you built a new one, the proposed amendments that are before you today will allow a one-time relocation of that now conforming billboard to a subject to certain criteria. And so that's what Mr. Johns wants to speak on.
Okay, good deal. Before I take public comment, any questions for our staff on that? Okay, I see none. Thank you, Anthony. Good deal. Go ahead and give your public comment
So we
then.
have 3 minutes again?
Let's start him over with this
Thank
3
you so
minutes
much.
and then we'll just keep rolling.
Okay, first, thank you, commissioners and community of Lee County for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Alex Johns from Becker Boards. Becker is one of the larger privately owned billboard companies in Florida. I was here to give awareness, draw attention, and gain support regarding the non-conforming billboard section 30-55. We have recently submitted a request for an ordinance change to the non-conforming section of the code that we are confident would benefit Lee County as well as the local landowners. The way the code reads today, section 30-55-4B, the only way a non-conforming billboard can be rebuilt is if a second billboard is torn down. In addition, after meeting with zoning and after months of research, there appear to be no, if any, conforming billboards in your county. What this means is the current two vendors that work in Lee today are the only two companies that can ever work in Lee under this ordinance. The current two vendors are well aware of this and take readily advantage by paying the lowest possible rent and continuously lowering rents over the course of their leases. As a landowner cannot work with any other company because of the non-conforming section. The current two vendors essentially have a monopoly over the market. This not only hurts local landowners, but the county itself, as it lowers the property value, land value, and does not receive fair tax amounts as landowners are receiving extremely low amounts on their billboards. We have met with over a handful of landowners who have echoed this story and have come forth written letters expressing their horrible stories of their experiences. We have submitted these letters to zoning as well as our proposal. If the ordinance were to change to allow the rebuilding of non-conforming billboards without a cap and trade, landowners would have the option to work with any billboard company of their choosing, which would drive far market rents and to be paid to landowners, increasing land value as well as county tax. I want to stress this would not increase the amount of billboards in your county. Rather, it would just be the ability to rebuild non-conforming billboards, so nothing would increase at all. Again, I want to thank you for your time, and I hope that you guys take this into consideration. Thank you for your comment.
All right, at this time, we'll go ahead and call Bill Finley, followed by Mary Ann Cowan.
Should I start?
Yes, good morning.
Hi, my name is Bill Finley. I'm president of Marina Villas Condominium Association. We're 40 privately owned units. We're situated directly opposite the hotel rooms we're talking about. When Timbers bought, they announced a new rental program. It says that if the resort is expected to reach 80% of capacity, then an owner's adult children or grandchildren that are with them are not allowed to use any of the amenities on the resort. So it sounds to me like we already have a density issue even before any new building. Two of our owners also own homes on Sanibel that were destroyed. And when we think of resilience, we think about adding what they're doing, steel and concrete. We're not talking about insurance or economic resiliency. We have one small road serving the north end of the resort. Timbers is going to add a restaurant and condos on the beach opposite of us. They're also going to develop the land next to us. On the third side is water, and on the fourth side is the hotels. So we're against adding a 175-unit hotel that could go up to 75 feet. Why exempt hotels on South Seas? Timbers used the hotel and was renting it before the hurricane. They bought roofing to put on the existing hotel to use it. So that's just a flawed argument that they need the additional revenue from that hotel when they were going to use the existing hotel. Timbers knew what they were buying, and they seem to be taking the idea, why let a crisis go to waste? Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. Surely we're smart enough not to damage our islands with the idea that there has to be consistency across the whole county. Our fragile islands are unique. They cannot support this additional density of excluding, not counting the 175 units. It's going to be a mess as far as the four-way stop we have and all this density there. The islands have been and should continue to be treated differently. We have owned since 1995. We own 3 units there. Our children and grandchildren come to enjoy the uniqueness of Captiva the way it is. I'd like to thank Commissioner Wan and the other commissioners that came to our public hearings to listen to our concerns. And for those of you that are not as familiar, I would ask you to listen to Commissioner Ruane. He's the closest to the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that was Bill Finley. Let's have Mary Ann Cowan, followed by Tom Sedlowski.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
My name is Mary Ann Cowart. It's an honor to be here and thank you for having me. I've been a resident of Lee County since 1981, and I've been blessed to work on Captiva Island since 1990. I've listened to multiple presentations by Greg Spencer, who represents Timbers, Wheelock, and Ronto. I've read Greg Spencer's memories of his childhood memories of Sanibel and Captiva. My first vacation to Southwest Florida was 1966. But it wasn't until 1979 that my family took me to South Seas Plantation on a catamaran named Strider, where we walked the beach and enjoyed the wonderful restaurants, including King's Crown, Captain Al's, Chadwick's, and Uncle Bob's. I knew where I wanted to live. My career on the islands began in 1986. Throughout the years, I have worked for 4 owners of South Seas. I worked for the Mariner Group, Miristar, Blackstone, and Timbers. My family and I are deeply enrooted in this community. We love South Seas. Throughout the years, we celebrated holidays, vacations, weekends, and even my son's wedding. On a professional level, we do our best to be responsible stewards and welcoming ambassadors to a magical place that so many refer to as their happy place. Timbers, Wheelock, and Ronto calls their future plans for South Seas resiliency. I disagree. The ordinance in front of you isn't about resiliency. It's about increased density, increased intensity, and building new buildings up to 75 feet high. I believe it is the responsibility of all of you to please do not accept these changes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll call Tom Sedlowski, followed by Hala Sandridge.
My name is Tom Sedlowski. I represent Bayside Villas Condominium Association, which is within the boundaries of the resort. I represent 102 property owners. I myself have been an owner of a unit within South Seas for 14 years. Well, since we were here last, there were a lot of public informational meetings, and I thank the committee for those meetings, and I also thank South Seas for the meetings that they had, informational meetings that they had with some of the owners in the resort. As a board at Bayside Villas, we decided to wait until all these public informational meetings had concluded for us to reach out and individually poll all our owners on whether they opposed or supported the current changes to the code. We got all our responses back within the last week and a half. The majority of our owners are in opposition to the increases in density and increases in height not required by resiliency. They do not support the current code changes that are being proposed today. One of the things that's very interesting about that vote is that a significant number of the owners within Bayside Villas are within South Seas Island Resorts rental programs. They depend on South Seas for the revenue. And even with them supporting or being supported by the revenue, they chose to oppose the proposed increases in density and height. We, as an association, support our owners need to have revenue. We support Timbers and their financial success. We support them increasing or improving their amenities, but we do not support at all their proposed increases in density and the increases in height, which have zero to do with resiliency. Bayside Villas, along with the other associations within the resort, have been more than open to discuss all these proposed changes to the codes with South Seas, and South Seas has chosen to discontinue their conversations with the Board of the Presidents as of recently. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, Hala Sandridge, followed by Sarah Spector. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioner members. My name is Hala Sandridge, and I am legal counsel for South Seas. As you have heard, South Seas property rights have been governed and subjected to an ADD for many years. However, the county has advised South Seas that it cannot amend the ADD. That means that the resort currently has no legal vehicle to petition the county to address its constitutionally protected property rights. Not only do the federal and Florida constitutions protect South Seas property rights, but they both guarantee that, that South Seas has the right to petition the government, that includes Lee County, to address its property rights. Because of this conundrum, with this proposed amendment, Lee County has sensibly placed the South Seas into the LDC so that it has the legal ability to come before the government to address its property rights, ensuring its constitutional right to petition the government. Lee County has likewise recognized that it cannot take away the South Seas property rights in exchange for guaranteeing that the South Seas has the right to petition the government. Accordingly, Lee County has logically recognized that the resort can have no less under the LDC than it had under the ADD. Moreover, per this amendment, the county has correctly recognized that when placed in the LDC, the Constitution requires the county to treat South Seas equally to all other landowners falling under the LDC. This is good policy, and the county's decision to amend the LDC to reflect this policy is prudent. But the objectors see it otherwise, and as you have heard, they have various reasons. They are asking Lee County to make the resort pay for its constitutional rights to be in the LDC by stripping South Seas of the property rights it holds under the ADD. The county should reject these demands for several reasons. First, and most obvious, following the objectors' demands would deprive South Seas of its constitutional rights, subjecting the county and its taxpayers to claims for damages. Second, the objectors' complaints relate to future zoning matters. In other words, the opposition's objections are premature. For instance, the objectors complain about transportation and traffic. Those are issues to be raised in subsequent quasi-judicial hearings upon any application that South Seas brings before this commission. The issues the objectors raise now relate to the LDC are not policy related to the commission's legislative function, but rather evidence for a future quasi-judicial hearing. All these issues are for another day. Thank you for your time.
At this time, I'd like to call Sarah Spector, followed by John Brown. Or Jay Brown, sorry. Good morning.
Good morning. Sarah Spector with Retzel and Andrus, and I'm here on behalf of Royal Shell Vacations and RLR Investments, which are collectively known as Royal Shell on the island community. Royal Shell has sold, rented, and managed both residential and commercial real estate on the islands for over 26 years. It currently manages and rents over 500 properties on Sanibel and Captiva Islands for third-party owners while holding significant residential and commercial assets on both as well. I tell you this not only to demonstrate that Royal Shell is an integral part of the island community, but also to establish that it has an interest in economic resiliency, as many do. However, even with such a vested interest, RLR does not believe that the Land Development Code should be revised in such a way as to benefit one party, and it does not seem that that was the intention of the commissioners back in January of '23. During the Commissioner items portion of the agenda on the January 17th, 2023 Board of County Commissioners hearing, Commissioner Ruane made a motion that brings us here today. That motion was to direct staff to review and bring back proposed amendments to Lee County regulations addressing height, setbacks, and other development limitations that are potentially restricting residents' ability to rebuild their homes and businesses in a manner that reduces potential flooding impacts, or threats, I should say. This includes review and proposed amendments to provisions of the LDC applicable to the development of South Seas. We were of the belief that this direction to staff was for the purpose of hardening our buildings while allowing build back of what was present prior to the storm. During the discussion prior to his motion, Commissioner Wayne referred to height, setbacks, and other development limitations. It seemed that his main goal was to address the unprecedented storm surge and the resulting damage, all in the name of resiliency, but more specifically, building resiliency as it relates to the buildings that were destroyed. That is, we did not think the task was to address economic resiliency so as to allow more to be built back, even with the motion referring to the development of South Seas. Here we were of the understanding that the term development was referring to building back South Seas, not building a newer, bigger, and better South Seas. But that is essentially what several of the proposed changes allowed for. Commissioner Wayne's goals of achieving building resiliency can be achieved for all by adopting the principles offered by the Captiva Community Panel and others, which I'm hoping you will hear about today, but I believe you've seen previously. Essentially, the principles allow everyone to build back stronger while not adding additional density that will overtax the current infrastructure that is restrained by environmental conditions that cannot be altered. Thank you very much.
Jay Brown, followed by Michael O'Donnell.
Thank you all. I'm Jay Brown, president of the Captiva Community Panel. I've also been a property owner and resident of Captiva for 25 years. My family is on Captiva because Captiva is different. It is a haven from the overdevelopment and ecological destruction that exists throughout Florida. Captiva is different than the rest of Lee County, and it needs to be treated differently than Lee County. We live on Captiva because it is low density. We live on Captiva because it has ecological respect. We want to live in the natural surroundings that we have now. You're all here today not for resiliency purposes. Everybody is for increased resiliency. Everybody encourages county staff to do whatever is necessary to make sure it is clear that people can build back what they had before and build back based on current flood elevations. So this is not controversy, has nothing to do with resiliency. This has all to do with treating timbers differently than everybody else on Captiva. Timbers needs to be subjected to the same density requirements as the rest of Captiva. Timbers cannot be allowed to develop additional floors of living space above current flood elevations. So let's make it clear. They can build back whatever they had and build back based on whatever the current flood elevations are. There should be no question, about that. But the way the amendment reads now, they can build back with additional floors of living space. And that's what Captiva doesn't want. We have a long history of 2 floors of living space above flood elevation. And that's what our community wants to continue to have. They don't want additional floors of living space built, which is what Timbers is going to do if you allow this pathway, for them to come back to you with a specific development plan. You are also making these changes in the LDC with no idea what Timbers wants to do. You have no plan before you. You're just granting them unfettered ability to increase density and to increase livable floor space. Why would you do this? Nobody else on Captiva supports this. You have thousands of emails. You have a petition with over 13,000 signatures.
Go ahead and call Michael O'Donnell.
Please respect that. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Michael O'Donnell. I'm a resident of Sanibel as of a year ago this week.
Welcome.
I really appreciate the meetings that you've had since it was delayed in June. It's been very informative. Really, for me, separated the drama of social media and the misinformation from fact, which was very helpful. I think that it's important for Lee County that this passes, and I think it's important that the islands get rebuilt. Lee County, Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, my home, Captiva, and South Seas, where I happen to sell real estate. We need the employees, we need the tourists, we need the economy back. And this is separate, as you've said, from zoning. That's a future issue. This just lays the groundwork for those discussions to happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Kathy Biggs, followed by Joe Barbie. I believe I said that right.
Hello.
Good morning.
I'm asking for a no vote for the proposed land use changes concerning the Timbers organization. I thank you for postponing the first meeting vote until today. I think that it gave us some very important time in the public meetings. The county staff who attended listened carefully and respectfully and constantly took notes as people spoke. I am, however, concerned that because of the storm, the workshop was canceled. You haven't been presented with all of the staff's findings and opinions. Without that, I don't know how you can quite understand what the public had to say. It also did not give you opportunity to change some of the language in the first proposal, which I think could be done and be fine with everybody. Timber should not be exempt from the Captiva rules. It just gives them a blank check, and that just is not the right thing to do. It would only seem fair, unless you all have decided to vote no on this, it's only fair to have the workshop that was planned. It was part of the process. So I'm assuming that unless you're voting no, that you will plan another workshop so that you can hear everything, so that everything can be discussed, and you can possibly reword some of the issues. I don't understand really how this whole thing is even on the table. This is proposed as a resiliency issue. This is not a resiliency issue that's being asked for. They're asking for to be exempt from the rules. That is not asking for resiliency. They want to be exempt from the current rules. I also believe that they are a smart enough business that they knew what they were buying when they bought it. You can't come into a neighborhood and say, oh, I love your neighborhood. I want to move here. I'm going to buy the nicest house out here. Oh, by the way, once I do, I'm going to change everything. That's going to be my desire. I ask that you would please not do this. You all could be heroes to the community. You all could be heroes. You could show the people of Lee County that you are standing with the people and that you're not going to side with a big business that comes through the back door that wasn't even a Florida business until a little while back. Be heroes for your community, please. I know that in your hearts, you know what the right thing to do is, and I am really asking you to please do that for the sake of these islands. These islands are not just normal Lee County. It is different out there. It's just not the same. You can't put the same rules to those barrier islands, Sanibel, Captiva, North Captiva, Pine Island. They can't follow the same rules. They're not the same kind of place. Please help us keep our islands the same, and you all be heroes for your community. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Barbie, followed by Lyman Welch. Morning.
Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Joe Barbie. My homestead is at 11551 Leica Lane, Captiva. Now, I understand, I've been in the real estate and construction business all my life. I understand where these people are coming from. But we all do our due diligence before we buy a piece of property. They made the comment at the meeting on Captiva that they did their due diligence. I hope you do remember that you made that comment. If you don't, we've
Guys,
got it on film.
Direct your comments to the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Very much, yep.
But you did your due diligence. You knew what the insurance problem was. You knew what the 100-year floodplain was. You knew what the county ordinances was, building. You knew what the Captiva plan was. Now, Captiva and Sanibel and some of the islands in Lee County are unique in their environmental. It will only stand a certain amount of population before it is destroyed. And we know, everybody knows, your plan is to have more people, more density, and more intense. Now, I would tell you, gentlemen, that I don't think we can stand anymore. Captiva is at build out. In order to build on Captiva, you got to tear something down. Sanibel is almost at build out. In order to build something, you got to tear it down. So I don't think by increasing the density and the intensity, which is their intent, is going to help. Thank you, gentlemen, and please reject their proposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Lyman Welch, followed by Sam Ankerson.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Lyman Welch, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club Calusa Group. We sent a letter to each of you back on June 15th objecting to the proposed changes to the Land Development Code regulations. And I'm here today. Nothing has changed in the regulations that you're proposing. Our opposition to these proposed changes remains firm. Sanibel and Captiva and the other barrier islands are fragile ecosystems. They need to be protected. We've just seen from Ian how fragile these barrier systems are. The proposed changes to the Land Development Code would allow changes that are not in line with resiliency. Instead, they would particularly benefit South Seas and allow increased density on Captiva. That would be damaging for the local environment as well as Sanibel with the traffic of people that would come through there. So we object to these changes. Just focusing on the specific benefit to South Seas, when we were back here in June, one of the commissioners asked staff if the changes for South Seas could be taken out of the proposal and just go ahead with the rest of the proposal. And staff said no. That just boggles my mind. You have very smart people on staff. You have very smart lawyers available to you that can be able to work this out. Even your own staff here today said that there are changes that could be made to the build back provisions of the Land Development Code to clarify ambiguities and make this better. So I don't think you should approve these changes. We are opposed to the changes that are proposed here, and think you should retain the restrictions that are in the administrative determination for South Seas. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam Ankerson, followed by Vice Mayor Mike Miller. Morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Sam Ankerson, representing the Bailey Matthews Shell Museum, which is located on Sanibel. And the comments I'm putting forward are from the point of view of an organization. We're a natural history museum and a nonprofit and educational organization that's been on the island for about 30 years. And putting forward a point of view as an organization, a business that relies heavily on a visitor economy, tourism, vacation-based economy. And intuitively might expect that conditions for greater numbers of vacationers and visitors on the islands would be to our benefit. We know from taking zip codes at the museum, that about 90% of our visitors are vacationers to the islands. So it's important to us. That said, we also know through surveys of our members and of visitors that the character of the islands and the very deliberate way in which their development has been managed on the islands for the past several decades is one of the distinguishing characteristics and a competitive advantage for why people are coming and visiting and staying. So from that point of view, we encourage you to not open the path, the door in this way to something that could potentially significantly change that, and I would support Mayor Johnson's suggestion to revert to staff and see if there may be other solutions. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Mike Miller, followed by Mark Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I waive the opportunity to make comments, but I am opposed to the amendment.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Mark Anderson, followed by Mark Cranford.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing me. I have been a citizen and an occupant of buildings in Lee County for nearly 50 years. I'm a retired contractor who has rebuilt South Seas after Charlie, and I worked for Mariner and did much of the building of the South Seas as it existed. At one time in this process, we did some timeshare and we had to remove parts of the golf course to establish the additional density that it took to do Harborside, which is a timeshare. I'm not sure myself what 2002 did to possibly change that, but this was done after 2002. So the whole process, as I'm seeing it and hearing it, I would go back to Mayor Johnson's comments. We need to look closely. We need to understand this special place. It has history, it has a place, but not with increased density. We have water issues. Right now, South Seas is contributing to those because of plant failures, and we're gonna load this place up with more density? It seems outrageous. Thank you.
Mark Cranford, followed by Holly Smith, Council Member Holly Smith.
Hello, County Commission. Thank you for having me today. My name is Mark Cranford. I've been a resident of Lee County for 36 years. Through the 2016 City of Fort Myers Art and Culture Grant Award sponsored by the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, I'm recognized as genius, conceptual artist, and American revolutionary. I agree with Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation's CEO, James Evans, that the decisions on changing the Lee County plan should be delayed until a public workshop is held. The citizens are not prepared to understand the environmental, cultural, and government plan for Lee County that was devised by ex-CIA and first mayor of Sanibel Island, Porter Gauss, with Robert Rauschenberg, conceptual artist, and an unknown academia called Occult and Art Metaphysical Academia. March 17, 2023, CCF held an event to start the process for re-examining the 1976 Sanibel plan and in light of Hurricane Ian. Featured speaker, distinguished University of Florida professor emeritus Thomas Ankerson was asked if a Florida community wanted to make a plan like they did in the 1970s on Sanibel. Do you, from your perspective, see a plumed knight like McCraig or Bosselman or Porter Gauss who might lead that charge? Ankerson responded in part that I am sure they are out there. Maybe it was a simpler time too, and maybe it's easier to have that vision than it is now. Maybe it might be a chatbot, I don't know. The other plan by Rauschenberg, Gauss, and Occult and Art Metaphysical Academia was to produce a culture where human vision would be eliminated from art and science, and so to produce tensions for civil war, and while imposing artificial intelligence on Lee County and the US while we were blinded. Lee County environment would be used when the time was right to stress the population for this purpose. I'm the closest peer here to Director Jay Dellinger of the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery. I have recently outed Director Dellinger as the academic adjudicator for post-World War II Antifa, the head of Occult and Art Metaphysical Academia. He is here in part for the possibility of establishing peace and sustainability for human governance in the time of artificial intelligence. Director Dellinger is here in part for the possibility of illuminating a new enlightenment. I encourage the distinguished Porter Goss, Director Dellinger, SCCF, and others to come forward and help the BOCC lead Lee County and the U.S. into a bright future. Lee County Academic Civil Culture Direction and Governance was set up for this possibility in 1979. Now is the time. Lee County and the city of Fort Myers is the place. My city councilman, Dr. Listen Boucher, asked me to write a set of reports on the forces that are tearing our city and nation apart. Because of my unique education and experience in inventions in visual art, I submit and read my reports as sworn affidavits to the city of Fort Myers, Florida. I hope to add my body of writing and documentation for your consideration by the BOCC in public and for the Lee County Plan.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you all very much.
Councilmember Holly Smith, followed by James Evans.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm speaking as citizen Holly Smith, and I'm also a hotelier in Lee County. And I'm going to speak specifically to the ordinance that you have before you. I am standing in opposition. I do not believe it is right. I refer you to pages 6, 10, and 12, where it specifically is giving an exemption to one developer, South Seas Island Resorts. And that does not bode well for the rest of Captiva or other areas when an extraordinary exemption is given to have allowances when rules should be followed fairly by all. When I built my properties, we followed the rules, we followed a process, and we did what was needed to be done. I do stand in strong opposition to this as it's written today. Thank you very much.
All right, James Evans, followed by Robert Brooks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. James Evans, I'm the CEO of the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. SCCF was founded in 1967, and our mission is to protect and care for Southwest Florida's coastal ecosystems. And we currently own and manage over 2,000 acres of land on Sanibel and the surrounding watersheds around Sanibel, Fort Myers, and even in Cape Coral. And just pure and simple, these changes will make our Barrier Island communities less resilient to future storm events, not more resilient as the goals that you defined. And I know we've kind of flipped it to now talk about economic resilience, but the reality is when you look purely at resiliency to the next storm event, more density, more intensity of use, more development on Barrier Island is going to make our communities less resilient, not more resilient. And we've made it very clear from the beginning, and we certainly understand that today you are not approving density. We're not putting misinformation out there to tell people that we're approving density today. We know we are not. That will go through the zoning process. We understand the process very clearly. But the reality is the changes that you're making today with the Land Development Code and the changes you'll be making tomorrow with the Lee Plan, if this hearing, if it's approved today, the reality is that you're paving the way for the developer to come in and ask for more density and more intensity of use through the zoning process. And yes, we will get to weigh in, but the reality is you're paving the way right now to make it consistent with the Land Development Code and consistency with the Lee Plan. Those are two major roadblocks that right now, if they came in and asked for that zoning, they would not get. So we completely understand that. We've also raised our concerns. We've made them abundantly clear, the impacts on the environment, the impacts on our quality of life, the impacts on the potential sewer system that may or may not occur if these changes occur or changes go through. And of course, the character of our Barrier Island communities, especially on Captiva. And during the public workshops, you heard overwhelming responses from the community in opposition to these proposed changes. So I just want to make that clear. I know you didn't have a chance to do the public workshop prior to this meeting, but I can tell you at attending 2 of those 3 workshops, there was overwhelming concern and opposition to the project. And we had over 13,000 people that signed the petition, of which 7,000 were Florida residents and 6,000 were Lee County residents opposing these Land Development Code changes. And it's really time for you to vote with the people that you represent instead of voting with one developer that will benefit at the expense of Lee County residents and our Barrier Island communities. So I'm asking you to vote no on these proposed changes. Thank you very much.
Let's call Robert Brooks, followed by Jeff Kavanaugh.
Good afternoon. Today I come to you with a heartfelt plea, a plea to accurately represent the will of your constituents when an overwhelming number have implored you to vote no on a critical land development code issue. The power vested to you, our elected officials, is derived from the people you serve. You are entrusted with the responsibility to be the voice of our community, to safeguard its interests, and to act in accordance with the collective will. A significant portion of our community has come forward, expressing their concerns and reservations regarding these code changes. They have spoken passionately and in unity, urging you to reject this proposal. It is not an isolated cry. It is in fact a chorus of voices echoing the sentiments of many. Representing constituents means more than just sitting on a dais and counting votes, casting votes. It means embodying the desires of those who put their faith in you. When a substantial majority expresses its wishes so resoundingly, it becomes your moral duty to heed their call. In fact, I heard in our invocation this morning the same message. Ignoring such a collective voice will undermine the very essence of your office. It will breed disillusionment, erode the trust that is vital to the functioning of our local government. Excuse me. I urge you to consider the implications of your decision carefully. Remember that true representation requires you to be the bridge between the objectives of your constituents and the policies you create. Your credibility will be defined by how faithfully you uphold this duty. In closing, I implore you, our county commissioners, to listen to the voices of the people who have entrusted you with their hopes and concerns. In this instance, they have spoken loudly and clearly. It is now your responsibility to truly represent their will by voting no on the code changes. Will you stand for your constituents, or will you abandon your electorate for the benefit of one special interest? The choice is yours. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff Kavanaugh, followed by William Harkey.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Jeff Kavanaugh, and I'm a resident of Sanibel Island. I've been trying to learn as much as I can about this South Seas issue, and I thank you for all the additional information I've received this morning. The problem is, as was pointed out by our mayor, Richard Johnson, is there's only one road to Captiva Island. And that road is a very busy road now. We've got gridlock in the summer, and that only used to happen during season. I was married on Captiva Island in 1989, and we spent our wedding night at South Seas Plantation. It was a magical place, and still is. Very laid back, upscale, very cool. If we start adding density and taking away height restrictions, I fear we're going to lose that good feel. 1 year ago, we bought our full-time, year-round home on Sanibel's west end because of existing land development code on Sanibel and Captiva. In my mind, at that time, we came to terms with the city of Sanibel and Lee County that this is how it's going to be going forward. If our agreed upon terms are changed by you, there will be even more trucks full of materials and people and on our roads. And when it comes time for a hurricane evacuation, I fear it's going to be an even bigger problem. I'm just not interested in that. Thank you.
William Harkey, followed by Carrie Schumann.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm William Harkey, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army, retired. I'm a resident of Sanibel. While I serve on the board of the Dingle Island Wildlife Society, Friends of the Refuge, I'm here representing myself this morning. It's my opinion that the proposed changes are rather disingenuous. They seek supposedly consistency and standardization of the rules governing density, building height, etc. My feeling, however, is that they are more important. The primary reason for requesting these changes is to put more bodies in their property at South Seas Resort. I think that they're using the destruction wrought by Hurricane Ian as an excuse to ask for the changes to these rules that they knew were in place when they bought the property. I'm a simple soldier, but to quote Burt Reynolds in the movie Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, I'm intelligent enough, and I think the people on Captiva and Sanibel are intelligent enough to know when someone is peeing on my boot, but trying to tell me that it's raining. I certainly hope that the Board of County Commissioners is similarly intelligent and that they will see this for what it is, which is an attempt to change the rules for the benefit of one entity and to the detriment of our two islands. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie Schumann, followed by Emily Ankerson.
Hello, Commissioners. So I'm Carrie Schumann, the Coastal Resilience Manager at SCCF. And thank you, as always, for the opportunity today to give public comment. So I do believe the public meetings that have been held in between June and now show that there really could be a potential pathway forward that would have more community support and really could result in better local outcomes. There seems to be clear agreement that Build Back provisions should be updated in a way to make Build Back more accessible, including everyone having access to what they have before, including South Seas. And I really think at large, our island communities agree that we should be exploring the right way to elevate structures that gets them out of the reach of storm surge and floodwaters more generally. However, I don't think that's the only thing contained and addressed in these proposed amendments and these proposed changes. These changes potentially right now, the way that they're written, pave the way for increasing total habitable floors and density associated with new structure on Captiva. And the language that specifically excludes South Seas from particular provisions does create, yes, we understand that there would be those future zoning hearings, but it creates a particular pathway for a group to ask for those increases in height and density, while also forcing the burden that comes with that growth onto communities that have not been part of a collective process to agree to that increased burden. Our islands realistically do have a very clear carrying capacity, which both islands have fought very hard to maintain. And we need to view that carrying capacity through a lens that is forward facing. So for instance, there are residents in both islands that will confirm we have been seeing worsening problems, for example, with flooding, and that sea level rise will certainly compound those issues. And so those stressors mean challenges our communities have already been grappling with, like providing for increased traffic, for services like better telecommunications, for better wastewater management. That's only going to get harder even with just the current population we have. So it hardly seems responsible to potentially be placing more people on these islands, especially in light of that. And incredibly importantly, this needs to be done right in terms of really understanding potential environmental impact. If we stress our dunes, our mangroves, our wetlands, our water quality, if those aspects suffer, then our resilience, our ability to respond to disturbance in the forms of storms, sea level rise, and other stressors really does suffer. And because Sanibel and Captiva's brand so strongly hinges on those natural systems, our economic resilience, which has been discussed over the course of these recent community meetings, will also suffer. So I really urge you to not accept the proposed changes as is. We really need that transparent process that works collaboratively with Sanibel and Captiva. And I think the folks here are telling you that they're willing to be engaged with you as representatives of the county and with county staff about what the right changes really are that are appropriate for our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Emily Ankerson, followed by Scott Crater.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Ankerson. I'm the Executive Director for the Captiva Civic Association and also a Sanibel resident. I am asking the Board of County Commissioners to please vote no and not accept proposed amendments that impact land development codes on Captiva. I have attended the public meetings organized by Commissioner Wayne over the last several weeks, and with the CCA being central to Captiva, in the Captiva community, I have heard personally from residents, property owners, business owners, timeshare owners, and visitors, people who know and love Sanibel and Captiva and care about what happens there. The overwhelming sentiment is to please protect this fragile environment, especially as it is healing from post-Ian impact. What is evident from these meetings held and the presentations given by Lee County staff is that the amendments still need work. There are aspects that are not clear, and more importantly, aspects that are not in the best interest of the barrier islands, and then not acceptable. Everyone who has contacted me has asked, how could the BOCC disregard thousands of people who have publicly voiced concerns about the proposed amendments? These concerns are not premature. It is my hope that the BOCC will do right by the islands and vote no today. Thank you.
Scott Crater, followed by Zeke McDonald.
Scott Crater, for the record, I waive in opposition.
Okay, thank you very much. Zeke McDonald, followed by Ken Suarez.
Good morning or good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Zeke McDonald. I used to live on Captiva, but now I live on Upper Captiva. I first visited the islands in 1957. Earlier spokesman for Timbers said that they had a constitutional right to develop their land that they bought. Well, does this include a constitutional right to yell fire in a movie theater? The proposed actions of the company are to have a great effect on all the residents and visitors to Captiva and Sanibel, and that effect is very negative. As said before, the barrier islands, the very barrier islands on the west side of our county, are a very unique place. For instance, Upper Captiva was deemed to be rural back in the 60s. Well, it's got nearly 500 houses on it now, and it's bursting. The Land Development Code has been torturous in its building, and it has been built with fire for good reason over a good number of years. The proposed amendment to the LDC uses sustainability, I think, as a wolf in sheep's clothing. It seems apparent to me that their end goal is more income, more impact on their neighbors. It should be known that they get a de facto revenue generating density increase by the fact that they've torn down the employee housing at South Seas, and they can now build back what they wish. And if they want to build to 70 feet, perhaps, maybe you guys would let them. I certainly hope not. I understand that this is not a question on density so far, but I think it's a preceptor to it. I urge you to vote against, I urge you to send this question back to staff and more thoroughly investigate the effects it will have on the surrounding communities. Thank you very much.
Ken Suarez, followed by Robert Locker.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. When we met privately, each one of you told me that you had to do what was right for Lee County. So I asked the question, where do you get that information from? County staff, county attorneys, and then you make a decision. As a fourth-generation Floridian, I realize, and I'm sure you do too, how special Sanibel and Captiva are. And where in Florida can you find that? Nowhere. So what's right for Lee County? To allow a developer to come in and add density? Because this issue is really about density, frankly. Yes, it's about resiliency in some way, but it's mostly about adding additional keys to a resort to make it more valuable, and then you will get more revenue. And I understand that will be good for Lee County, but that's about it. So the voices, as Mayor Johnson said, they have been speaking loudly. You've had several thousand emails. We have petitions. We have utility companies raising concern, public service people raising concern, stakeholders, owners on Sanibel and Captiva. And you can add to the list of that the 4,500 people who signed the South Seas petition, because frankly, they want South Seas to stay the same. They signed a petition that said, would you like South Seas to reopen? Replace the destroyed Harborside Hotel with a new hotel featuring upgraded amenities to be built. New and improved resort amenities, services throughout South Seas. New upgraded food and beverage concepts. To experience amazing Sunset Beach. To experience renovated, enhanced Bayview Pool Complex. To build back the resort in a resilient manner to avoid destruction from storms in the future that has happened as Hurricane Charlie, spelled wrong, Irma, and Ian. To help bring back the workforce who livelihoods depend the opening of the resort, to allow South Seas to move forward in a resilient and thoughtful manner to help rebuild the fabric of South Seas for generations to come, which guess what? We agree with. And apparently, past guests agree with the same. They don't want change. We don't want change. We want resiliency. We want improvement. We want Timbers to succeed. But vote no for this, or send it back to staff, because this is not about resiliency, it's about density. Thank you.
Robert Locker, followed by Chet Sadler.
Good afternoon, County Commissioners. My name is Robert Locker. My wife, Chris, and I have been visitors to Captiva for 40 years, property owners for 8 years, and I serve as the president of Gulf Beach Villas Condominium Association. We spend 2 to 3 months a year on property and rent the remainder through South Seas, so we're very interested in the financial success of Timbers. Professionally, I'm a PhD scientist who has worked for Corning Incorporated at our R&D labs for a little more than 38 years. I'd like to address the issue of density in the LDC amendments that I believe deserve closer assessment, but I do share the concerns voiced by others on height. I want to present data on a seaside island community of resorts. The community supports a population, the community spans approximately 6 square miles of livable real estate and supports a population of a little more than 9,000 people and hosts about 2 million visitors a year. The community has a rainy season and a dry season with an annual rainfall total of about 12 inches. The community isn't Sanibel and Captiva, but rather Lahaina, Maui, Hawaii. On August 8th, about 3 months into their dry season, a perfect storm of conditions fueled by high winds and drought led to catastrophic wildfires. In little more than 24 hours, the tragedy was complete. We still lack a clear understanding of the total loss of life, with over 100 confirmed dead, over 300 still unaccounted for as of Friday, September 2nd. Many lost their lives trapped in a single-axis evacuation road, Highway 30. I want to compare Sanibel and Captiva's similarity to Lahaina. Population of Sanibel and Captiva is approximately 25% lower than Lahaina on approximately 3 times the livable land. We enjoy almost 1.5 million visitors a year, about 25% less than Lahaina. Our community leaders over the decades have done a good job managing the population density on our islands. for quality of life and likely also human safety. Sanibel and Captiva also suffer from wet and dry seasons like Lahaina, but a greater fire concern on Sanibel and Captiva is the sporadic destruction of large stretches of dead mangroves and palmetto forests that too often occurs following hurricanes, creating greater risks of wildfires in our islands. Density is a concern in safely evacuating communities like Sanibel and Captiva with single access roads. I strongly recommend that the county commissioners do not approve the density provisions for South Seas, and in so doing, also consider the topic of resiliency as it pertains to human safety and life at the end of a 13-mile single access road. Thank you.
Chet Sadler, followed by Susan McCallan.